Hello, hello, hello. Welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you are all doing well. Welcome to the Shakespeare Show. So, for today, I thought it would be interesting to go over some stuff that I've been wanting to talk about, but kind of haven't really gotten the chance to. So, I thought that perhaps we would start with discussing, actually, reviewing, I guess, in some ways, um, the wonderful series by Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr., who did the Black in Latin America series. And one reason why I find this work to be particularly important is because, again, he went to parts of Latin America where the fact that we have the fact that there is African heritage is kind of purposefully forgotten, particularly when it came to the sort of nationalist constructions of particularly Mexican identity. But we are going to go into what the episode that is called like Black Grandmother in the Closet, which again is something that is actually in a way brought up if you've ever watched the film like Water for Chocolate or Como Agua para Chocolate. Right, like that actually plays a big role, especially because in the film it's very clear, right, that they're white, right? The whole family is white. So again, that will be one of the movie night movies, maybe for next Friday. We'll see. But also, I do want to wish everyone, happy holidays, since they are starting all this week. Hanukkah starts on the evening of Christmas Day, so, have to make my, Hanukkah tamales and such. But, besides that, everything seems good to go. On YouTube, I did put it subscribers only because I wanted to make sure that people like and subscribe. So make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube. Okay. We're also going to talk a little bit about Rwanda. I chose against a documentary that foregrounded a lot of the sort of negative aspects. What I mean by that is, like, I don't want it to be, say, uncomfortable for people for people to like discuss this topic, because I think it's important to talk about. But as I said, like, I do want to discuss what happened in Rwanda in 1994, right? Which of course was infamously known as it was a genocide. And as people know, right, that is something that I think not only needs to be talked about, but because it's actually rather not talked about, right? It's actually one of the things that I found that, people are very hesitant to go into. So I thought that, and also after the stream, we are going to be in the Discord and we are going to watch a movie that was suggested by Ivan, who is one of the Discord mods, actually. So, feel free to, again, always feel free to put stuff in stream suggestions. There's so much there, and it's so wonderful. But don't think, only thing is, like, if it's breaking news, just know that I probably, I won't wait on that, because, breaking news things can change really quickly when it comes to breaking news, right? So I try to avoid it, because again, like, it's just me here. Oh, thank you so much, Full of Nicks. Thank you. Yeah, actually try to, I don't know, attempt makeup today. So I do have to apologize insofar as this is not going to be like the best quality video, but it's the best one that it's the best version I could find. So this is episode 3 of this series, okay? Which is titled The Black Grandma in the Closet.
They mixed from the beginning. You cannot see them, but it's there.
Many people remain unaware of their African ancestry.
I asked my grandpa, why you never told me we are black?
But today, those African roots are becoming more visible.
Blacks are here now, and they are demanding that their rights be recognized.
Mexico
And yeah, like, just to start off, like, the first free settlement of escaped slaves was actually in Mexico, because that was, at the time, the largest, economy, right, in terms of, like, international commerce, etc. Like, later on, especially once you have, larger, like, countries that have larger plains, right, where you can have, like, larger plantations, particularly for the production of sugar. Yeah, like, along with indigenous people, the racial caste system usually placed black people essentially at the very bottom, which is why a lot of people, don't want to recognize the fact that, we have black ancestry, right? But it is part of our, it is part of our history. It is part of our heritage. It is why it's the Plaza of the Three Cultures, right? Which also I wanted to thank Boy Meets Minnie for, and Anonymous for purchasing the book, sponsoring the book, The Plaza of Sacrifices, because that actually talks about the Plaza de las Tres Culturas. So,
Peru, the Black Grandma in the Closet, Black in Latin America.
Yeah, all over Spanish America there was a Sistema de las Castas. It also existed in some sense in Brazil, but in the Portuguese colonies. But I mean, obviously it was mediated in a different way because there are different expressions. But then in the 20th century, you have it where one of those things, right, particularly mestizo, they decided to just try to collapse in all of the other ones into that one, in Mexico in particular. And by doing that, they created the mestizo, like this idea, right, that everybody in Mexico was half indigenous, half European, right, and sort of use that to sort of, erase a lot of the other. One, the fact that indigenous can mean many different things, right? There's not just one indigenous people, right? Yeah. Yeah, no, in Brazil they had it too.
When you think of Mexico, what comes to mind? Endless sunshine, white sandy beach.
Yeah, what do people think when they think of Mexico? Like, like in one sense, I'm kind of like, oh, that question is, it's fine. But I'm also curious, like, what do people think when they think of Mexico? Like, do they think of, like, I don't know. I usually don't expect something necessarily good, but, but endless sunshine and beaches, I mean, I guess if you go to Cancun and Acapulco or something like that, sure, fine, or Baja.
The Mayan and Aztec ruins. And Peru, Machu Picchu, the great Inca people, 5,000 varieties of potato.
That's right, if you go to Peru and the Andean region right there, you can try all the over 5,000 varieties of potato. Over 5,000 varieties. Something that starts with the word C. Oh, yeah, well. Yeah.
How many of us us realize that far more slaves came to Mexico and Peru together than came to the United States in the entire history of the slave trade.
Like, I think this is an important fact right here, right? More slaves came to Peru and Mexico together, right, than ever came to the United States in the entire history of the slave trade. So from the beginnings in the 16th century to its end, right, in the 19th century. The difference is that, of course, intermarriage was seen as okay for the most part, in Spanish American societies, right? So, but again, like, this is why, for example, like Brazil, it's a very interesting land of contrasts, insofar as, and again, I don't know how well these statistics hold up now, but I remember reading that Brazil has the third largest number of white people in the world after the United States and Russia. The second largest number of black people in the world after Nigeria, and they are the number one in terms of indigenous people population. So it's this very interesting, third, second, first of different cultures, right? And they kind of have a lot of cultural spheres where, if you go to southern Brazil, it becomes much more European, right, in terms of its like where people are from, and you see like more German names and more French names, etc. If you go to northeastern Brazil, you see that there is still a very large contact with traditional cultures of the people that were brought over to Brazil. And then if you head to the extreme west, right, in the kind of like triangle, you reach the part where the most of the indigenous people live, including hello, Mikhail Das. You will see far more Italians emigrated to Brazil than ever immigrated to the United States. And that affected its language a lot too, in the same way that it affected like Rio Platense Spanish too, for sure.
I've come here to search for the lost history of black people in Mexico and Peru.
So the city he's in right now is Veracruz. Now, I don't know if Jelly might be in the chat. Is that true? Is what true? You have to take into account 1900s immigration. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I only said French because, like, that's something that I guess, like, people don't necessarily expect, right? Like, oh, yeah, sure, they had immigrants, but, it was this and not that, right? Obviously. But I'm waiting to see what Keiki Inc. is asking me, if it's true or not. Okay. But yeah, I taking into account the 19th century, like the turn of the century, yes, more Italians immigrated to Brazil than ever immigrated to the United States. I mean, that's just a fact. Numerically. But this is the city of Veracruz. I've spoken to Jelly about it prior, Jelly's also one of our wonderful mods, and they also stream. But you can see, right, the Caribbean style. I mean, again, much more Caribbean. Even though Veracruz is technically, like, if you want to say, like, it's in the Gulf of Mexico as opposed to the Caribbean, fine. Right, in terms of like geographic, hydrology or whatever. But in terms of like culturally, I mean, it is by definition the port that was used, and it is connected to Havana, Port-au-Prince, Santo Domingo, etc. So That's why it has a much more Caribbean atmosphere. French people is the most post-Spanish and Portuguese viceroyalties. Actually, the term Latinoamericanos comes from French colonizers. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that like the idea of Latin America was something the French under Napoleon III started to use, right? That there was an Amérique Latine, right, as opposed to an Anglo-Saxon America, right? And that also was used for the justification of, the installation of Maximilian of Habsburg and Charlotte, his wife Carlota, as she was known in Spain, Maximiliano and Carlota, to rule over Mexico at this time. So yes, yeah. If you were Iberoamericano, it includes, like, usually that phrase Iberoamericano is a way to include, if you want to talk about discussing people as though they're related only to the peninsula, sure. But usually Ibero-American now also refers to things that things which encompass both the nations, right, Spain and Portugal, as well as Latin America as a whole, right? So that's also because there's Universidad Iberoamericana, right? It's from Spain, but it, which includes Brazil, right? Exactly. And so that's a very good point. Portuguese colonizers. Well, I mean, the thing is, the term Hispanic, right, is something that was created in the 60s, right? I mean, that is to say, if you go to New York, right, before they used to say, oh, that person's Spanish, right, to when they were talking about Puerto Ricans in particular, but hence Spanish Harlem, right? And so that was because, again, those Cuba and Puerto Rico, etc., were Spanish colonies. So to call them anything else wouldn't have made much sense. And because, again, there was a lot of immigration that went from Spain to those colonies. I mean, hence why Fidel Castro's family, he was the son of immigrants from the Kingdom of Spain. Yeah, in the United States, they have this idea of Hispanic, but the issue is that it's not good at describing people who are not of Spanish heritage, right? That's the thing, is that in the idea of Hispanic is the idea that you must have Spanish heritage, but indigenous people, right, might have a Spanish name. It doesn't mean that they're Hispanic, so to speak, right? Same thing with people that are from other places, right? So, I mean, again, this is why the terminology that's used is usually defers to the geographic one as opposed to anything to do with culture or other things, because the idea that there is some continuity, right? Is when you exclude Brazil from Latinoamericanos over there. In the U.S. it's a bit different because Latinos only refers to people in the United States. It does not refer to Latin Americans, right? This is the when people talk about Latinx or Latine, right? That has nothing to do with people from Latin America, right? It's talking about people that are already established as communities in the United States. That is why those terms, only refer to that. In fact, if you join I forget what it's called, but the Center for Latin American, whatever it's called, the Center for Latin American Studies, there is all of these countries, and then when it comes to the United States, it says US/Latinx, right? Because that's all what Latinx refers to, is people inside the United States, right? Whether they be colonized peoples, right, like the Mexicanos that are descendants of those that were after the border was moved by force by the United States, right? Puerto Ricanos, etc., etc. So Cubanos as well. So, but Latinos is actually a term from Europe based on language. I mean, technically, yes. I mean, Spanish is a European language, right? Carlos Fuentes is a European name, but I mean, try telling that to and again, like I mentioned in Discord, which definitely should be in the Discord if you're not already, is that it's one of those things where, again, the difference in how the United States views race vis-a-vis Latin America is very different, right? Like what defines whiteness in the United States is very different from what defines whiteness in Latin America. And that's because, again, whiteness is not something that is, as it were, has a positive ontology. It's not an attribution of it is this. It is a negative one. It is not indigeneity. It is not blackness. It is not this, right? So that's another thing. So
The charming town of Tlacotalpan was founded by the Spanish in the 16th century, but it boomed in the 18th century when it became a major trading center for sugar, cotton,
thank you.
cattle, and horses. All commodities produced by slaves, Indians, and mestizos.
No, yeah, I know.
Today, Tlacotalpan is known for its fandangos, music and dance that combine Spanish, indigenous, and African traditions. Fandangos are a fitting metaphor for the African roots of Mexican culture.
And again, like these are roots that have been, ultimately speaking, rather, forcefully in many ways, forgotten, right, by the government, by the education system, which is why like Afro-Mexicanos have had to fight so hard for them to be considered un pueblo originario, right, for them to receive similar benefits and protections that are given to the indigenous peoples, right, to be considered as being part of those peoples, because of the fact that for so long they were sort of cast on the wayside, right, because they didn't fit either category, right, either the mestizo state version of definition of the citizen or the indigenous people. So they but
Fandango. Those girls are great. Now the boys dance or just girls?
Well, they always say that the first hour for watch the girls. Check if you want to dance with one of them later.
Rafael Figueroa, an ethnomusicologist, grew up here. He's an expert on this music, which he's heard since childhood.
Fandango, it's a really mix of Hispanic and African mainly, even though it's Hispanic instruments. So they are played in a really percussive way, and they are played, against each other with the result of a big polyrhythm. Polyrhythm.
That's African.
Yes. I think Fandango's ending around 6 or 7
a.m.
next afternoon.
I love this town. What could be more Mexican than La Bamba? I remember singing the chorus along with Richie Valens on the radio. But I didn't know that the song was sung here as early as 1683 by Angolan and Congolese slaves.
So again, like this is something which also adds another thing of complexity, right? Like the fact that because of the way in which the slave trade occurred, right? That it's we have evidence of this song going back to the 17th century, particularly being sung by slaves that were brought over from Angola and parts of what is now the Congo, particularly during the Iberian Union, when Spain and Portugal were one united kingdom, and so Spain had access to the then the heretofore Portuguese colonies, right? So
Like the fancy footwork called zapateo, La Bamba is another example of Mexican culture's complex African origins, now blended into a rich, brown, ethnic mix.
Hey, bravo, bravo!
But since so many black slaves came to Mexico, why doesn't anyone around here look especially black?
They mix from the beginning. That's why you cannot, see them, but it's there.
So the blackness is diluted.
Yes, a lot of African elements are still present. We are darker than the rest of the Republic. Also, the way of talking.
yeah, so again, as I was saying, like, one of the things that I think is most important to keep in mind is, again, this is the more historically accurate view, right, of the average Mexican person, right? That they are all, right, they all have some African ancestry, right? Because, again, everybody is related to everybody else, right? Just numerically speaking. And although there was immigration that came in from different places, again, you also had things like the slave trade, like, of course, the indigenous peoples, right, which, often migrated or whatever it might be. And so, therefore, you had a mixture that, again, still exists to this day. However, what is seen as most important by the government, right, when it was trying to construct, right, the national identity was only two parts, right, like I said. Only a specific indigenous part, that is to say the Aztecs, and then a specific European part, that is to say the Spaniards, right? But we know that obviously it wasn't only Spaniards that lived or that migrated to what was then called New Spain. We know that people from all of the territories that Spain had under its control, Italy, Belgium, Franche-Comté, etc., they also moved there, let alone over time. But what that means is, again, that because everybody, like, intermarriage was common, right? This means that the average person does have, right, African heritage. But it's something to be proud of because of the fact that, again, it's part of who we are as a nation, right? So
We have a specific accent.
Really?
Yeah.
Can you do it for me?
If you say helado, ice cream, here you would you drop the D, so it's helado, or you drop the final S of some words. And it's really common among the people from African origin.
I've noticed some people will say buenos dias instead of buenos dias. And I thought, what's wrong with you?
About an hour and a half from the Fandango's festive atmosphere sits the somber port of Veracruz.
So this fortress right here that you see, right, was actually built by slaves themselves. Like, as soon as they arrived, you already had them being put to work, and particularly to build this fortress, right, that was the port of Veracruz. So that way, then they could make it easier to transport more slaves to Mexico. So it's the reason why, like, again, like, Veracruz and its form of, and another thing, going back to what Dr. Hernandez says, right, is the fact that we see, right, common elements of Spanish pronunciation, right, throughout the Caribbean, right, also being present in Veracruz, right, and a lot of that is, as he points out, right, a distinctive feature of populations with African origin, right. So that is what I think is also, very interesting as well, right, where you do have, Elao, right? You do have these things that do become sort of part of the way in which people speak, right? So then it becomes a dialectic thing, right? So
One of the main points of entry of Latin American slavery. Starting in 1535, virtually all of the commodities arriving in Mexico, including African slaves, were unloaded here.
It was called the Key of New Spain, the port of San Juan de Ulua.
Judith Hernandez studies the archaeology of Veracruz, and Sagrario Cruz Carretero is a professor of anthropology at the University of Veracruz. Both are helping me imagine the arrival of hundreds of thousands of slaves through this very port.
How long did it take to get to Veracruz from the ports in Africa?
Some records mention 2 months.
That's a long time to be in a steam bath.
Right, and I found 20% of the load died.
oh gosh, I know. Thank you so much for lurking, by the way. And oh my gosh, those are so cute. The Adrian's emotes are so cute. Yeah, like I wish you wouldn't have said like, oh, the like 20% of the cargo essentially. Like this is one thing that personally I never like to talk about. If I do discuss something like slavery, I don't like to use, right, the terms, right, that would be like the business term, right, like, right, the kind of thing that abstracts them from being human beings, right, like, oh, 75% of the cargo made it to its final destination. No. We're talking about human beings, right? Like, you can't talk about them as though they are, like barrels of wine or something,
And in the 16th and early 17th centuries, 1 out of every 2 slaves bound for the Americas disembarked in Mexico. In fact, in the year 1553, Viceroy Luis Velasco asked King Charles of Spain to curtail the trade, fearing an uprising, and with good reason. Until 1650, the number of blacks and mulattoes was roughly equal to the number of white people living here.
So again, this speaks to the fact that people of African origin, right, and also people like the white, settler colonists, because remember, all of the countries in the Americas started off or have, right, an element of settler colonialism, right? They either are outright settler colonial states, or, right, they started off as settler colonial states, right, and like this is often where like this terminology comes to be challenged by the idea of like Haiti, right, where the settler colonists that were the French, that were the landowning, French, etc., they essentially were all expelled. So it's difficult to say, therefore, that the Haitians that now live there, right, somehow, would be considered settlers, right? So it's a very different story. But in Mexico, it is a settler colony because, again, the European people did go and settle and conquer and do all of these things, right? And are still there, right? I mean, there are people that can trace their lineage back to, supposedly anyway, to particular people that, like this viceroy or this whatever person, right? But
These are rings to which they tie their ships.
They're heavy.
The port didn't have a pier or docks. The ships arrived directly here.
What would happen when the slaves arrived? They would be checked medically?
There were paid surgeons to review the blacks. And the checkup consisted of licking the beard.
They lick there? That sounds nasty. Why?
The sweat conserved salt, so if you were salty, that meant they had good blood pressure.
How much?
oh my gosh, that is what a weird thing to do. I'm gonna lick your chin? Like that, like, I feel like that's gonna become a new trend now that it's out there in the world. Yeah, chin licking, Okay, it's just like, I don't even know. That shows he has good blood pressure. Okay, Sure.
the slaves cost?
From 150 pesos to 400.
Oh,
Let me compare.
Okay.
A house costs 400 pesos.
oh wow. So a slave
400 pizzas. Oh, I wish it was 400 pizzas. So again, if a house in Mexico at this time, colonial Mexico, costs 400 pesos, which again, at this point, they were coins in gold and silver, etc., right? Like that's what... That means, again, for the price of a house, that was how much a single slave was worth. So that means that if you have half of all slaves from the 15th and the 16th century going to Mexico, that means that there are people that have, right, the resources, right, the money, right, the capital to, right, engage in chattel slavery, right? And that's something that I think bears keeping in mind.
in a house.
It's a
That's a
luxury.
lot.
It was a luxury.
This is what the slaves would have seen first, after surviving the treacherous Middle Passage. Here they encountered a new country, a new language, and a new life, as someone else's property.
These walls are covered with African blood because they were forced to construct this gorgeous building after the
That is not what she said. She said because, not that. Bad. Oh my gosh. Why would you even...
indigenous population decreased because illness, and they were forced to dive into the ocean and get these stones because they are made of coral.
I see, coral,
yes,
yeah.
Yes, it's coral, and many of them died in this process. It is a history of death and a history of invisibility.
So this is the fingerprint.
So again, like they're saying here, yes, that in order to build these very walls, right, that we see here, right, it involved having to send people to essentially go diving into the sea to pick up blocks of coral, to then bring it up to the surface, so that then they could build this entire complex that you see here out of coral. So when they say, right, that there are that there are lots of, that it's, sort of, as it were, covered in the, right, that blood is an important thing to keep in mind, right? Like all of this suffering that had to take place in order to build this in the first place should have us, in mind, should rather have us keep in mind the fact that, every step of the process, there was always violence, right? There was no time that there wasn't.
In a black history in Mexico.
Right.
It was right here.
Right,
Death and invisibility.
And I think that the invisibility part is, again, the part that to me stands out so much, because again, like, everybody wants to pretend that they are just mestizo and that, that they're all like, that the sort of national narrative that was created, where it was constructed over time, that it was the Aztecs and the Spaniards alone, right, that they created a brand new nation. I mean, it's very similar, actually, enough to Canada's idea, right? The two nations, right, the French and the English, right, that they founded a new nation, right? Especially because, again, like, if you have to acknowledge that that's not true, right, or that it is or that there is a distance between that and the truth, then you have to admit that again, people whose identities have been brought up and constructed on this idea that they are only those two things, now they have to include a third thing, that particularly something that is seen as historically, that has been marginalized. Black people have been marginalized, oppressed, just had so much violence placed against them, even if they, just for existing, right? that's what makes this invisibility so, you know, makes the death, you know, have all of these other, you know, magnitudes of problems, right? Even to this day, right? Like, it's something we still feel in Mexican society now, right? So, this is on YouTube. I tried to find a better copy, but I could not find one that was like the whole episode. There were clips, but welcome in, Julio.
Professor Sagrario Cruz has invited me to lunch, promising me 2 significant clues to help me solve the mystery of Mexico's missing black population.
This is my family. Well, I show some pictures to show you. And this is a very old picture, and this is my grandpa with his sons.
The banditos.
Yes. And this is the way.
You know, it's funny that he says that, because that language of bandits, right? Like, again, I talked about this. No. It's a good portion of the part of the episode where he's in Mexico. That's the part that I'm watching and going over. Yeah, because that I can speak to far more in depth. Hello, Cat Pig. Welcome in. It's so nice to see you. Because again, like I was sort of discussing earlier, like with Laura Esquivel, right? You have like water for chocolate, right? And the fact that somebody has black heritage, right, literally causes a major event in the book to happen, right? Like the discovery of that. But going back to my point, like the fact that he called the sons banditos, right, bandits, right, speaks to this history in the United States of viewing Mexicans, right, in this way of like, oh, you know, already criminals, right? Like we went over this when Armchair Historian was talking about the Mexican Revolution, right? That, oh well, Pancho Villa was just a, you know, cow thief and blah blah blah, like a bandit, and it's like, but at that time, they would always call Mexican people bandits in the United States, particularly in Texas, but also in neighboring states as well, like New Mexico, etc. So, how much of it is real? It's you know, it's a whole question. Have you seen any clips from Peru? This low-key might be helpful for my thesis. Well, if you want, I can, if you're in the Discord, so you can do ! Discord, I'll put this in general afterwards, because it does have the rest of the, yeah, many people still do today, that's right. Because it does have, it's like a playlist, right? That's why I'm using it. Like, I know it's not the best quality, but it's, well, yeah, I mean, like, then they use bandit, right? But, like, there's still this view, right? Like, where if they see someone who is Mexican walking in the store, right? Like, the way how, like, people suddenly get back to their carts and, like, hold on to their purses, right? It's like, girl, I don't want your nasty-ass purse, okay? I don't need your, you know, whatever the hell, it stinks, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want it. Like, it's again, always viewing though as though we are just potential criminals, right? But yes, I can, if you are in the Discord, I can put it in general, and then, just put at Shakespeare or Shakespeare, and then just let me know, you know, that it's you, and then I will respond with the link to the playlist, because it does talk about Peru. I mean, again, I studied under someone who studied under Henry Louis Gates Jr., right? So, like, when it comes to, you know, particularly, again, the areas of my own expertise vis-a-vis Latin American history, that's why, you know, let's see here. let me see if I can find a Discord link right now. Okay. There we go. So that's the Discord. Of course, of course.
Wedding of my parents.
Look how pretty your mom is.
But he's a dark man, and
She's
he
light.
right
So your family's part black?
is part black, and it's something that was omitted until I was 19 years old.
How did you find out that you were part black?
Because I traveled to Cuba. And when I arrived there, they started talking about the African heritage and the culture. I suddenly realized my family was black.
Huh.
Because looked like
Yeah, like, and again, like, this is something where a lot of times people will, like, kind of like this, where people visit Cuba or people visit the Dominican Republic, or they will go to places in Mexico itself, like La Costa Chica or Guerrero in general, and they will go to the parts of Mexico where people are more, as it were, visibly, quote unquote, right, Afro-Mexican, and then they will come to realize that actually, oh yeah, my family does have, because again, like, it's part of the national, like the fact that there were so many enslaved people, right? But when you look at the charts of different sections of the population, right, you have a precipitous decline of people that identify solely as black. Sort of in the 18th and the late 17th century, and that's because of intermixture, right? So, yes, the population of so to speak, like, people that only would identify as black went down, but the number of people that have black heritage, expanded out, right, to include far more people, right, than people would care to think, right? But instead it's been invisibilized by, again, the state still trying to envision a Mexico that is only half European and half indigenous, right? And even then, it's not even really indigenous, right? Because it's only an ossified view of the Aztecs. Whereas, like, the European aspect gets to be more alive, right? Like, oh, like Spaniards as they exist now, Europeans as they exist now. Whereas the ossified Aztec is still something that is, from a long time ago.
my grandpa looked like my father.
Yeah, no, they definitely look black.
And when I started tasting the food, I said, oh my God, it's the food my grandma prepares at home. Huh. I recommend you to taste the mogo mogo.
That sounds African.
Yes, sounds African. And we have the same recipe in Puerto Rico. It's fufu.
In Ghana, fufu.
Right.
Fufu is like having a bowling ball in your belly.
Yes, yes. And in Cuba, it's called mofongo. And here we have fried yuca.
I love fried yuca. It's like a big French fry. But
Right. This was originally prepared by slaves because they needed carbohydrates.
yeah, they had to work all day in the sun.
Right.
This is some good food. How did it make?
Oh wait, what did you say, Capik? The guy on the left reminds me of Erich Honecker. Oh, you mean the wasn't he like the last president of the DDR? Right? Am I getting the exactly with stuff like Danza Azteca? Yeah, like it's something that for me has always been an issue because of the fact that, like, I'm Jewish, right? So I'm Jewish and Mexican, and for me, it's been very interesting because there is this desire to view us as never being able to be part of the Mexican identity as such, right? Like even if like the time that we've been living in Mexico goes back, so long, people still try to identify us as a whole as though we were, we just arrived. But also that we are not part of the general community, right? That whereas that's not the case. Like most Jewish people look just as Mexican as everybody else, right? No, yeah, no. I'm saying, Mikhail, that you're right that they weren't the only nation, right? I don't like to only use the word tribe because usually tribe is a subcategory, right? Like there are clans, right? There are, then there are clans, then there are tribes, then there are, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes up in size, right? Until you get like a nation, right? At least that's a typical, but the Mexica, right? The Mexica were one of the Nahua-speaking people, right? That had a tributary empire, right? That, was vast for its time and was essentially in its classical period, right? And so the reason why the Mexican government in the 30s and in the aftermath of the revolution chose, hello MIDI doctors, the reason why they chose the Aztecs is one, because the story of La Conquista de Mexico involves them taking over and fighting against the Mexica, right? That's where the name of the country comes from, Mexico, right? The Mexica, right? But also because they had, the reason why is also because they had, in fact, there's actually a book on my throne that sort of talks about this. It has Porfirio Diaz and then the big Sol Azteca behind him, and it's like searching for artifacts or something like that. But it's like the desire to both Europeanize Mexico, right? Say like, oh, we're just like, we're just Europeans over here, right? But to also say, but we're also settlers on this land which is ancient and whatever, blah blah blah, and we also have this ancient history, so that even if people do have indigenous ancestry, right, it's grandiose, right? It's something near mythical, right? And that's the reason why the using of the Mexica in particular is because, again, they had they were an empire, they had architecture, they had, right, etc. Like they have things that fit, right, a view of the world that it came out of Western Europe, that civilization means X, Y, Z, right? And so because they fit that in the 1920s and 30s, when that was still seen as the primary view of how to determine civilization, or whether a people were quote unquote civilized, that's why they chose them, right? Like that's why you hear about the Aztecs and the Mayans, right? But what about everybody else, right? Like so Forever Foreigner. Oh, there's a really good book on that. Oh gosh, is it Southwest? There is a really good book, but it's escaping my mind right now. But it's really good, and it's talking about Asian Latinas as well. So remind me of that. I'll look it up in one of my bibliographies. I know it's there. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
You feel suddenly to discover you're black.
Weird. It was like if you will be this, you will discover that you are.
Oh, Jelly, hello. It's so nice to see you. Yep, the last one with the meaningful time in the post, yeah. And in Haiti, it's called Tonton. Interesting. Yeah, like, so earlier, I don't know how long you've been here, Jelly, but earlier, it actually showed Veracruz, right? Like what you and I were talking about before. So it was showing like the fandangos and like how La Bamba was something that was sung by people that were enslaved, right? That were brought over from particularly Angola and Congo to Veracruz, right? So like that's where you get the song La Bamba, for example. So yes, and please remember to like and subscribe. Yeah, don't worry, like trust me, like my two areas of expertise as a historian are Jewish history and Latin American history, and they're like overlap, right? So but because of that, looking at overlaps in these ways means I have to read I've had to read a lot of other things. So I have plenty of bibliographies for a lot of different things.
Adopted.
When you came back and told your family, did they tell you you went loco up there, drinking too much rum?
I asked my grandpa, why you never told me?
I like how it doesn't translate it very well. So like it says drinking too much of ramen. I would like to think that drinking too much ramen juice, so to speak, right, would cause you to like. Yes, I will. I enjoyed your collab last stream. Oh, you mean Jelly? Collab last stream? I am planning a collab soon. So hopefully that happens. That would be this Friday. Yeah, and don't worry, I'll send you the link for the whole series because there's an episode on IT, particularly. Well, IT and the Dominican Republic, right? Like Saint-Domingue, right? So I think he meant yeah. Oh no, he meant rum. But I like the fact. I think it's funny that it meant you're drinking too much ramen.
We are black. And he called my hand and told me, sweetie, we are not black. We are morenos.
Oh, moreno.
Of course, he was aware that he was a black man, but he rejected that identity.
That's interesting.
And I think this happened.
And yeah, this is a very common thing where like they were. Yeah, I was ranting about IT with Ray K and Echo Waves and others. Oh, that sounds awesome. That would have been cool. That sounds fun. Well, if you ever need to add, some Caribbean Mexican stuff, I'm always down. Or just Mexican stuff in general. Or Jewish stuff in general, I guess. But anyway, I know drinking ramen, like, the ramen juice is making you go crazy. Yeah, IT, there's so much to learn about IT. And again, like, this is why I think that I do hope that overall, like, I wish that people could learn more about it. Like, one thing I am happy about is that, like, in my hometown of Tijuana, that because there is now a little Haiti, right, which is called Principito. Well, some people call it Principito as a way to reference, Port-au-Prince, right? But, it goes by other names. But that now actually people are actually, like, learning more about Haiti than they otherwise would have, precisely because of the fact that, they are now forming a community in my hometown, right? Yeah, I would love to see a Mexico-Haiti connection. Like, it should have happened. There's stuff that I have read where, like, there were Mexican priests, right? Like, that were actually, interestingly enough, they were Jewish, like they were crypto Jews, but they had, joined the church, right, to try to make sure that they didn't, whatever. I mean, I can't tell you whether or not they believed, right? I don't know about all of that, right? But this dude literally went to Haiti to go fight, to fight on the side of the Haitians, right? Like he said, I will, what is it called? I will defrock myself, right? So to speak, and go, or actually he didn't technically defrock himself. He says, like, it's my duty to, blah, blah, blah. And he ended up surviving, too. Like, I mean, he did have, a wound because that was very bad. But, he did fight against the, and he was called to it because he knew that he's like, you can't. So, NYT is running a very interesting series on Haiti. And do note that they allow people who cannot run scripts to read the site without paywall. Huh. Interesting. I rented for 8 hours and didn't even touch the revolution or the story of First Contact. Oh yeah, that's a whole thing. I mean, that's why I was like sort of going into the fact that like there are technically all of the states in the Americas are settler colonial states because they all started that way. But there are challenges to that because of like Haiti, right? Because obviously you had people that were, enjoined, I mean, coerced to be in, there. and then they eventually won against, the settler colonists, right? And so that complicates the definition, because it's not like you would consider the people that were brought there against their will to be necessarily the same as settlers, right? So I tried to send you a message on Discord, but it said it didn't go through. Oh yeah, no, just go in the Discord and just at me. Just like at Shakespeare. In general. Just so that way I know who you are and I know who to send it to. And then I can DM you the link. It's a lot. Yeah, and if you'd like to help me out, you can always do so by going to my link tree, of course. There are many ways, either through Cash App, through Venmo, as well as if you would like to tip me, you can go to my Twitch page and use the tip function that allows you to use PayPal. Otherwise, you can always, gift something to the funds, my emergency fund that I have on Throne, which I would greatly appreciate, or anything else. That's totally fine. In any way that you would like to support me, I am appreciative of that. Same thing with my Patreon and Substack, right? If you want to support me in some way. Financially, Haiti continues to be a colony to the present day due to the onerous debt imposed under threat of law. Oh, well, yeah. Yeah, it's the U.S. was also extremely keen on ensuring that Haiti would fail. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean... And hello, Simon. Comment allez-vous?
Happens in most families that you hide the black grandma in the closet.
The black grandma in the closet.
Yeah.
And I actually like the language of the closet, right? I actually like that because it goes to show, right? Of course, I can easily say, Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, right? Epistemology of the closet, right? But in a way, right, it is, as it were, the reign of keeping secret, right? It is the reign of, of knowing when to reveal and not to reveal, right? The fact that you are in the book, the epistemology of the closet, right? Queer, right? But in this case, so to speak, blackness acts in some ways, right, like a queering element to the national, the approved national story of the Mexican people, right? Like there is the national narrative, right? And blackness brings all of that into question, right? And so in that way, you have the idea of the closet, right? Being the place where people's blackness or African heritage is put, because again, Mexico is still a settler colonial society that is still racist, still white supremacist, right? Still all of those things. But it likes to use the facade of the fact that it has this national myth, right? That, sort of belies a lot of things, but... fatigué, mais ça va bien. Bon.
In America, traditionally, if you had one drop of black blood, you were black. If the one drop rule were applied in Mexico, all of these people would be black.
Yeah, if the one drop rule were applied to me, it would, but it doesn't, right? It's not how it works anymore, right? But yeah, at least, but again, even that idea of the one drop rule is it's not actually a real thing, right? There's no such thing as blood itself does not actually do anything. And that is something that, you can read in Maria Elena Martinez's genealogical fictions on the beginning of blood quantum ideology, right? So the culture of white passing, well, yeah, Meowdy, I'm late, but not never. Well, I'm glad you're here. So again, people would rather reject their indigeneity as well, right? Like, if there are people that are indigenous, I mean, there are times when, there are even films, right, that in their time, it was considered okay to say this, and of course, it's being said to demonstrate how indigenous people are being discriminated against. But they do mistreat someone who is indigenous, right? And so, but again, like, this is the same thing with what Josefina Saldaña Portillo wrote, right? Who is the Indian of Aztlán, and saying that because the Zapatistas were not an indigenist movement, that is to say that what they wanted was not only to apply to just indigenous people, but rather was something that would be, on a larger scale, would include other people, right? That made, again, the narrative of the Mexican government of the two nations, blah, 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 just like how Canada has the two nations myth, Mexico has its own. The difference that it's not two European nations like in Canada, where it's the English and the French, but in Mexico, it's the Aztecs in particular and the Spaniards, right? So again, it questioned all of that. Well, if they're not an indigenist movement, right, then we can't do the typical trick, right? That this is what ended up happening, is that they couldn't do the typical trick of saying, that still holds, in many ways to this day, the idea that the indigenous people are something of the past, right? They are a relic of the past, right? And that's actually a very 19th century view as well. But it did exist, even in the United States, it still exists in a way, because of like the reservation system, right? That it was meant to place indigenous people out of sight, out of mind. But in the 19th century, there was a view that there were two peoples on, that would go, quote unquote, extinct, right, so to speak, right? And I'm only saying this metaphorically. And that was the Jewish people, right? That eventually they would eventually either all convert to Christianity and lose their Jewishness, or whatever, right? That they just wouldn't keep that their culture wouldn't stay, right? That eventually it would go away for many different reasons. And the indigenous people, right? That eventually the indigenous people, now that they are so low in number, it just means that eventually they will just, according to Adun. Okay.
Almost 500 years separate the onset of the slave trade and rumors of black grandmothers in a Mexican family's closet today. What happened in between? From the market in Veracruz, African slaves were taken to work in mines, sugarcane fields, and wealthy homes, but they didn't accept their fates passively. By the early 17th century, at least 10% had run away, forming independent settlements called palenques.
By the way, there is a city in Mexico, like a town, like a very important city, a very important city, not town, called Palenque. So it's important that, again, that there is a place, but one of the most famous ones, and I know it's going to go into this, I already know, is the one of Yanga, which is often seen as the first free black settlement in the Americas ever. Because essentially the Spanish at the time in New Spain, they couldn't do anything about it, right? Like, they were unable to really reach them. They had found this, interesting, topographical, space that allowed them to essentially be able to be, that didn't let the Spanish be able to, sneak up on them or to be able to do a direct attack or whatever it might be. So instead, they literally just said, fine, we'll just let you be. Yeah, and then indigenismo changed to everyone is indigenous, and therefore in erasing indigenous people in the present and using to excuse discrimination. Exactly. Yes, and this is the reason why, like, there is a critique that is often made, but I often feel that it doesn't take into account the fact that, like, the idea of like Chicanos, right, where they will talk about their right, they will stress their indigeneity, right, and in many cases it's, you know, people that are Yaqui or, you know, Kikiapu or whatever it might be, right? So they belong to nations that, you know, straddle the border or whatever it might be, right? But you also have the kind of like what Julio is saying, right, where you have people using this idea, well, if everybody's indigenous, right, therefore we can appropriate everything for how we like it, and also we can forget about the other indigenous people, right, the ones that are still there, right? Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Moenop. Thank you so much for the tier 1 sub. Yay. I like that little goose. Maniple?
The most famous runaway and rebel leader was a man named Yanga, the founder of this town, which is located a few hours inland from Veracruz.
Carmen, who is Yanga?
A hero more than anything.
A black slave. Supposedly, he was a slave of the Spanish who broke the chains.
He freed himself from oppression that the Spanish had over him. And he also liberated the slaves.
What my girlfriend said. That's why they call Yanga the first free town in the Americas.
Yeah, like that. This is very often what they will say about Yanga, that it's the first free town in the Americas because, you know, the rest of the area, right, was colonized by the Europeans, and, you know, all the different European, you know, empires had already colonized, like New France, you know, the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the Swedish, the Danish, the, you know, everybody, right? Am I the only one who thinks that the video is mostly text to speech? Oh, thank you, Wiki. Like it sounds like that? Yeah, it's mainly because the quality is very bad. But I tried to find a version that had like the full section that talks about Mexico, and this was the best one I could find. So, but it's literally titled Black in Latin America. It's episode 3, Mexico and Peru, the Black Grandma in the Closet. So,
Oh man, give me 5, Gustavo. You're the man. You're a genius. You could be a professor.
In 1570, 50 years before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock.
remember that. 50 years before the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock, there was already a free, you know, place in New Spain, right? I think that's important because like people like to act like the idea of emancipation or the idea that people wanted to be liberated only came to be in like the 19th century. I don't know why people in America think that like, oh, people just accepted their condition, like those that were enslaved, until the 19th century, when then other people, right, that were not enslaved sort of joined on their side, right? Do I like statues? I mean, I guess so. I'm an expert at useless knowledge. I firmly believe the expression useless knowledge is pretty much a contradiction. I mean, it could be.
Esper Yanga and several other men and women not only ran away from slavery, but spent 30 years hiding out in the mountains around Veracruz, attacking the Spanish in guerrilla raids and defending their community. The Spanish never could subdue them. Finally, in 1609, the Spanish admitted defeat and offered Yanga his own independent town in exchange for peace. Yanga settlement became what some scholars believe to be the very first town founded by free black people in all of the Americas.
And like, you know, when it comes to people often will say, you know, like when it comes to things that I guess Mexican people should feel some, I don't want to say pride, because I think that that's not quite what I'm looking, or quite what I'm trying to say, but it's like, there are times when people ask me like, oh, you know, Carlos Slim used to be the richest man in the world. And I'm like, yeah, I know. I mean, just because he's Mexican doesn't mean I am happy about it. Like, that's not how that works. And yes, if you'd like to support my research, I have put some books on there as well on Throne recently. But again, my emergency fund by far is the thing that, you know, I would appreciate most. But, you know, there are some books there as well. If you would like to help sponsor one, you can always go to throne.com/Shakespeare, as is spelled for my channel. So, but yeah, the consensus is that yes, this was the first free town of freed black people in the entire Americas. You don't like billionaires? I know, right? I mean, it's the same thing when they will talk about, like, I don't know, just like other things, and it's just like, that doesn't, you know, like, to me, having a free set, like the, you know, a settlement of people that, you know, that were able to defeat the Spanish using, you know, insurgency, guerrilla tactics, and then were able to defeat them and were granted, you know, their freedom, and began the, you know, and this was in 1600, that in 200 years, 201 years later, you would have the end of slavery being declared by, you know, the sort of father of the independence wars, right? Miguel Hidalgo, right? Like, to me, that's far more important than anything that, you know, oh, some billionaire or some this or some that. And yes, if you're looking for other ways to help me, you can always do so. Here. Oh, wait, 1 second. Let me actually pin this, because I think it'll be best that way. But let me transition really quickly. But yeah, that's pretty much. Also, I'm curious, actually. It says ooking. Ooking for ways? Okay. And I know, again, like I said, I know it's pretty bad quality, but, you know, it is what it is. Marx Baba, yeah.
Are most of the people around here black?
No. Well, most people aren't completely black, but we are morenos.
Cultures, they combine.
And again, this is very common, right? There are so many ways to say, right, that you have African ancestry, but saying you are black is something that is not seen as culturally, like, very, like, the people that are Afro-Mexican that live in the Costa Chica, they are likely to call themselves black. But people like this, they will rather call themselves morenos, right? That's just a typical thing, right? And I know that a lot of it has to do with the fact that, again, blackness, wooking is a new trending word, I guess so, is still, again, like, colorism is still a huge thing in Mexico, right? Like, so let alone, you know, the racism against indigenous people and black people, right? That's just been there since, you know, day one of the Spanish even looking at what is now Mexico.
So what are you?
Mestizos. Mestizos because we're light brown.
Are you Moreno or no?
Yeah, so see, like, there's this view, right, that mestizaje or mestizos means equals brown or some form of brown, and that if you're slightly darker, you're a moreno, right? And it's like the idea of mestizaje is, as it was conceived by Jose Vasconcelos and by others, right, is a view that essentially the way how Vasconcelos in his book The Cosmic Race, and yes, it is literally called The Cosmic Race, so you know what type of, it's one of those type of books, I'll definitely say. He essentially speaks against Herbert Spencer, who actually came up with the phrase, it wasn't Darwin, survival of the fittest. That's why I never use that term, because it's not Darwin's term, it's Herbert Spencer. And he argued that we should take Darwinian principles and apply them to races of people, right? That's his big contribution to science for Herbert Spencer. And I say science in air quotes, of course, because of course it's race science. And so that is where you got a lot of the justification for the treatment of the indigenous people, of people in Africa and the rest of the world by Europeans, because, of course, it created another hierarchy of people, right? That at the moment, right, because Europeans had the colonial power, it fit into their already view, right, that they had white supremacy for the most part. Vasconcelos, however, takes that for granted, right? Like, yes, those races exist, right? Like when Herbert Spencer says there are 5 races or whatever, he takes those 5 races and then builds his own theory out of that, right? And that's the initial mistake of what he does, because where Herbert Spencer is essentially an argument for the purity of a race, quote unquote, right? Vasconcelos says that by mestizaje, by the mixing of all of the different races, we will create, quote unquote, a cosmic race, right? A race that has all of the best features of everything else, right? But you can see where that's a problem. Yeah. Yes, he wanted to essentialize the human condition, right? And again, I'm not saying this. This is Jose Vasconcelos in his book, The Cosmic Race, not me. But that's more or less the thrust of the book. But again, like I said, there are many ways that people identify. Mestizo is usually how people, if you were to ask them, like, what are you? If they don't just say Mexican, sometimes they'll say mestizo, because, again, that's like a broad general category that essentially everybody sort of was put into, vis-a-vis the government of Mexico. So.
Look.
What are you, Indian?
I am black.
You're negra? You're a very beautiful negra.
Hernan Cortez, the famous Spanish conquistador, arrived in Veracruz in 1519. Then he headed to Mexico City, which the Aztecs called Tenochtitlan. One of his fellow...
Oh, well, come on, Henry. Henry, you know how it's pronounced. We went over this. Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan. Not Tenoch. Race in Mexico sounds very complicated. Yeah, because of the Europeans. They're the ones that made it a big issue. In fact, there are stories of Jewish people, right, that had made it to the Americas to try to escape the Inquisition, right, before they started Inquisitions there. And literally, many of them actually went to go live with the indigenous people because they accepted them as they were, right? Like, I'm not even joking. Like, there are stories about this, right? The thing is of course, because we only have anecdotal evidence, right? I can't say for certain we know this person, blah, blah, blah. But there are recountings of people doing this by the Spanish in particular. Like, they write about this happening. So,
conquistadors was a free black man named Juan Garrido. I'm following in his footsteps.
Yeah, Juan Garrido was a free black man that was Because again, do you have readings on that? I would love to see. Yeah, I just have to. I have them. I have multiple bibliographies from when I do teach stuff about like race and sort of like Jews in Latin America. I just have to look through it because someone did write about this in particular. I think it's like a couple of articles that I could post in the library. So, because again, remember there was already slavery going on, right? Like the Portuguese started, right, chattel slavery as we know it, right? They were the ones that kind of made the slave trade. And started using chattel slavery right away, which is when the Spanish, after Bartolome de las Casas wrote, a brief description of the destruction of the Indies, where he said, we are destroying the peoples that live in the Americas, so, blah, 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 we're treating them horrendously, so therefore we should instead import African slaves, like the Portuguese. Later on in his life, Fray Bartolome de las Casas ended up, recanting the fact that he ever said that. He recognized his own mistake by saying that, which goes to show, right, that this belief that people back then, that's just how they saw things and they always did it, right, blah 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 blah, right, is not true. It is not true. People could see the harm that chattel slavery did, and you had one of the people who, again, was able to convince the crown to change in the first place. One of the people that helped convince them, for sure, not the convincing voice, but very famous to this day. And instead, we have him even saying it was a mistake to even say we should just switch to something else, right? Like the amount of suffering that has been created, right, is just as monstrous as what I have described before, more or less. And so that goes against this idea that, once you go back a certain amount of time, people have no agency, they have no foresight, they have no insight, they have no ability to... I don't know why people think that, at some point in the past... I always thought this, you can't judge past people by today's standards is overused. Did the Bible say thou shalt not kill 500 years ago? Because I'm pretty sure it did. I mean, it's a different, yeah. I mean, in the sense that, for example, when it says, the fact that people were able to see the harm in chattel slavery, right? Whether it was applied to the indigenous people under the encomienda system or to African slaves via chattel slavery, shows that this idea that people were they just followed, as it were. I mean, it's literally like the Nuremberg response, right? They were just following orders. It's just the way how they saw things. It's just the way how they felt. No, even people who at first called for the institution of chattel slavery in Spanish America later on said that was a mistake, right? No, I agree. I agree with you completely. It was wrong from the first. But I do think the fact that he did come to realize his error, right, is something to be remarked, right? I do think that's he was, because again, part of the Spanish imperial mission, right, was to convert as many people as possible, right? That's why the colonization style, if we can even say that, right? It also shows stature to admit you did wrong. Yes, and he really did say, what I did was a horrific idea. It has only made things worse. And so I think that, but again, that is a really good example of someone who, again, the fact that people could admit that they were wrong and say this system is wrong, shouldn't happen, etc., right, goes to show that, like, even now, right, the people that are just, oh, it's just the way it is. It's just the way how the world works. It's just the way how... No. No, that is not true.
Cortez was dazzled by the city's overall beauty, by its irrigation system, but especially by its gold. He brutally conquered it. Today, Mexico City is constructed on top of ancient Tenochtitlan, with over 21 million...
Come on, Tipland? Henry, come on. We went over... Tenochtitlan. Tenochtitlan. Come on. In German, we have the concept of regret in action, tätige Reue, where an offender takes steps to revert, reduce, or mitigate the damage of their crime. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, he, as a priest, right, said, you know, we are harming the indigenous people so much that they are, you know, dying in mass, right? That they are, they're being brutalized, and we're supposed to be showing them Christian charity, etc. Because again, one of the missions, quote unquote, of the Spanish was also to convert as many people, right, as I said earlier. So the idea that you had this workforce that was susceptible to disease, etc., blah, 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 right, that was then being brutalized via, you know, excruciating labor, went against the idea that, oh, you know, you're going to, you know, have people to convert, right? Because again, that was one of the things, right? They wanted people to rule over, right? To collect taxes from. They wanted, right? Whereas in the English, instead, they wanted to completely eliminate indigenous people, right, from, you know, the areas that they took control. Right, just a very different, you know.
In residence, it's the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. I've come here to find treasures too, but these are housed in the National Museum of Mexico.
So what are you taking me to see?
We're going to see the Casta paintings.
The Casa paintings.
By the end of the 17th century, interracial relationships were on the rise. The Catholic Church allowed marriage between all groups. The law granted freedom to the children of black slaves and indigenous women. White men increasingly impregnated black women.
They always be...
Oh gosh, why does he have to put it like that? Henry! Why did you have to put it like that? That makes it sound so wrong. Jeez, why? Oh gosh, why do people have to use clinical language in the weirdest way possible? At the worst time? Like, come on, bro. Henry. Dr. Gates, please. Don't say it like that. Please. Please don't say it like that. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty unfortunate wording, assuming we're talking about consensual relationships. Yeah, exactly. We're over here talking about marriage, and he's talking about, like, oh, God. Anyways.
In with Spanish and Indian, that it makes mestizo. Then mestizo and Spanish.
Like, another thing too is, again, this is the reason why this system, right, eventually got to the point where by the time these paintings were being painted, right, you get to a point where they stop actually being, like, the society has already moved beyond this idea that there are such pairings, right? Because it starts to just it instead is a kind of like art, like a subject of art, right? To sort of think about the colony, right, of New Spain in the past, right? How things used to be, right? Because again, if we were to follow the original rule of what mestizaje meant in the Spanish Empire, then nobody or very few people in Mexico would be mestizos, right? Because nobody is exactly, right, has a white father and an indigenous mother, right? only that produces a mestizo, right? So it's like, right? But again, it doesn't matter because now we've redefined it, right? So
Castiza.
Castiza.
The third one is castiza in Spanish, mixed Spanish.
Maria Elisa Velasquez.
So again, like you could literally move up. I mean, it's interesting that they focused on the three white ones. I mean, rather on mestizo, castizo, and español, because it also I don't know if they're going to bring it up, but there were two categories of Spanish, right? Because it wasn't just blood quantum, right? It wasn't just blood quantum that it was important to the Spaniards, right? That was there too, because this also presumes as well, right, that the Europeans aren't Jewish, right? If they're Jewish, you can't marry at all. In fact, you're going to be taken to the Inquisition, right? But it presumes, right, that they are of pure Spanish heritage, right? All of the men in the picture, or whatever, and that they are peninsulares, right? Now they could be criollos. Criollos meant white people, right? Europeans that were born in the Americas, right? This is who, for example, started the independence wars. They are the ones that were at the top of society, right? It wasn't the indigenous people that rose up against the Spanish as such. No. It was the criollos, the white people that did not like the fact that the Spanish Empire hindered their ability to take the top ranks in society, right? Like you had to be a peninsular in order to be the viceroy, the archbishop, like all of the highest positions in society could only be by peninsulares, which means that you have literally an ideology not only of blood, but of soil as well, because it takes into account this idea that a white person, right, born in America is distinct, right, due to their being born on that soil, as opposed to the soil in Europe. That there is an essential, immutable difference, right? Plus all the Spanish people who are Arab, mix of Arab, or mix of Jewish, the Moriscos, there's so many different,
Velasquez is a professor of history and anthropology. These 18th century casta paintings were painted to show Europeans the diversity of the people here. These 16 images are sort of an anthropological cookbook, showing the results of mixing the...
Oh gosh. An anthropological cookbook. Oh gosh, Dr. Gates. That's such a weird way of putting this. Oh gosh, why would you... Like, I know people talk about, like, having a bun in the oven or whatever, like, when they talk about pregnancy. But, oh gosh, calling it a cookbook, this is kind of... I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just a bit like, because of my own research, I'm very like, but it is a cookbook showing the results of mixing the genes. Like, it just sounds like, like you're like over some like cauldron, like, we're gonna mix some European genes, like, I don't know. That's just what comes to mind. That's just, I don't know.
Genes of black people, brown people, and white people. What about me? Which one in the 16?
You will be here, look.
Let me see.
This one, a mulatto. The little kid, that's the mulatto.
The beautiful brown baby like me.
Yes, of course.
What would Barack Obama be?
Also a mulatto.
Okay, Beyonce, she would be mulata?
Yes.
What would Tiger Woods be?
A lobo, with African descent blood and also indigenous blood.
These people were crazy.
Yes, they need...
Yeah, see how that, okay, all of these people here, they are mulattoes, but because you have indigenous blood, I forgot the name of the person. They're a sambo, right? Like, imagine that, because in the United States, they're all seen as black, right? For the most part. Of course, there are people that have been, approximated or assimilated to a great degree into whiteness, right? Like Tiger Woods, etc. But it's interesting that as soon as we place them within this, racial categorization chart, suddenly now they're distinct ones, right? They're no longer, as it were, related. The Barack Obama baby. Pretty sure that's how storks create babies. Yeah, in a large cauldron. Yeah. The Barack Obama baby. And this is the Tiger Woods baby, apparently.
It's pseudo-scientific reasons to explain why some cultures will be inferior, and you have to make them slaves.
And they found it.
They found it.
16 shades of black.
Yeah, I think, does he actually say blindness or blackness? Because I feel like he would have said blackness.
Yes, they need pseudo-scientific reasons to...
I mean, there's pseudo-scientific reasons, yes. But Americans think that, like, race is, like, real. Like, real. Like, you know, like, real. And that's a problem. Because you could tell them, oh, it's pseudo-scientific. It's blah, 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 right? You could tell them all you want. But so many people in the United States, even BIPOC, right, do think that it is, you know, something that is real. I think I've seen this dude before. Is this video about race in the... No, he did a whole series, right? Someone I studied with was one of his grad students at Harvard. Because he's like the chair of the Department of Black and Africana Studies at Harvard, right? And so Henry is actually, or Dr. Gates, I guess, is very well known for like editing the Norton anthology of African American literature, which, you know, I've always wanted to. Like, if I ever could teach a class, you know, I would probably co-teach it. But still, if I could ever teach a class to talk about, like blackness and, you know, indigeneity, you know, like, well, race, right, in relationship to, like, the Caribbean or something. Like, I would take excerpts from that because there's a lot of good stuff that's there that talks about, like, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti. But anyway... he does an episode where he's on the island, right, of Española, right? And he starts off in Haiti and then goes to the Dominican Republic. That's episode 4, I believe. This is from episode 3. Also, hello, Bueno.
Explain why some cultures will be inferior, and you have to make them slaves.
And they found it.
They found it.
16 shades of blackness.
Yes.
But why were your white people more willing to sleep with black people than my white people?
Oh my gosh. What a way to put it. But it's also kind of like, yeah, like, why was it that... Well, that's because, again, the idea of intermixture was not seen as necessarily negative. But yes, white people in Mexico and the Spanish colonies were more willing to, you know, just, yeah. Now, yeah, he does. Look, he's the chair at Harvard, right? Academia is one of the most conservative institutions in society, right? It's about the reproduction of knowledge, right? And again, it's Harvard of all places. So, again, it's literally the forcing house of the civil service of the United States. So, yeah, you know, but, you know, I just wish that he wouldn't say things like, you know, just certain things. But yes, this idea that the white people, but one thing I do think it's interesting though is that white Mexicans can go to the United States, and sometimes if they don't have like a Spanish surname and they don't have like an accent, I suppose, like they can pass as white, I suppose, as like whatever whiteness means in the United States. But then you get sort of this question of like, oh, well, you know, why is it that if someone has a German surname, right, and like you know, a name that can easily be either or, right, that they can be considered white, but someone that's just as white, so to speak, skin color wise, right, that goes to show that when people try to say it's just skin color or It has nothing. Whiteness is not about just skin color. It can change depending on where it's happening, where the whiteness is being, is being observed, right? Sometimes when it is beneficial to it, it does highlight like skin tone. However, there are times when it doesn't. It will highlight other things, right? It's more, it's that's what the people that say, oh, white people, blah, blah, blah. It's like the reason why there is no real thing as the white people, so to speak. Like the reason why they're not a people is because whiteness itself is not a one and done thing, right? It's always being constantly shifted around depending on wherever people are, right? Like Irish didn't used to count as white in the U.S. and they tend right, and you also and even at a time, right, you had a lot of indentured servants in places like Jamaica or places like other parts of the, as they used to call them, the West Indies. Well, typically the West Indies now refers to only Jamaica, but to other British colonies, where you have the language being changed from Christian to white, right? Where they literally take the same law that says people who are not Christian, right, can be enslaved, to people who are not white can, blah, 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 right? Like this was something that was done, right? And this is where you start to see this like dividing and conquer type of thing, right? Where, well, if we give benefits to the people that also come from Europe, right, even though we still see them as lesser than, they will be willing to not side with the African slaves, right? And so that is something that, again, it has a long history of happening. But like the 60s also is when like the assimilation in the United States in particular, and the place that it was most, it took its the place that it led to the largest amount of anti-blackness in the United States was New York, right? Like Italian Americans, Ashkenazi Jewish Americans, certain types of Eastern European Americans, Irish Americans, right? All, if you're looking at the history of the 1960s, right, all came out against having, certain things being built within their neighborhoods, or, again, actively being, hostile, and eventually leaving to the suburbs, right? Like, that's the reason why, although there are Hasidic neighborhoods in Brooklyn, right, the most Jewish areas of Ashkenazi Jews anyway, is something like the Five Towns and in Rockland County, right, suburbs. And that's something that occurred over time. Initially, that wasn't the case. Initially, all of the Jewish neighborhoods were in the city. Now most of the population itself is actually in the suburbs, right? And to the point where Jewish people are a plurality, right? When it comes to Rockland County, right? Where, where Rockland Kosher, which is like the kosher Walmart is, right? And so, like that. So again, just to recapitulate what I was saying, right? Only when it is beneficial to whiteness does something like skin color even play a part in it. It doesn't really matter, because in different situations, what whiteness is, or that is to say, what whiteness encompasses and what whiteness is, reacting to, because it's a negative ontology, right, changes, right, by the material condition. So oh my gosh, not the cooking class.
Quite well, because the culture,
the racial cooking
of the Spanish church allow the marriage between all the ethnic groups, and also.
And yes, that's true. The Catholic Church thought it was a positive thing, right, so to speak, if people did intermix, right, they didn't see it as negative. They saw it as a way to, ensure, right, that people would become members of the colonial society, right? That was what was most important to them. Again, because they want to have an empire, right? So for them, doing what the English did, right, of eradicating, all of the people they came across, right, was not what they wanted, right? They did do settler colonialism. All of the Americas, they're all settler colonies, right? But one of the differences is that, of course, there were people that were given essentially the ability to, at different points in time, right, to have sort of some power, even be raised in the racial caste system, right? And it did happen where they would change it in the registry of the church, right, which would say, oh, this person is mulatto or this person is whatever, right? And then if they were willing to like move to the frontier, right, there's actually a really good book that talks about this. It's what is it called? It's by Menchaca. I just can't remember the title. Something about recovering history, constructing race, something along those lines. But it talks about how a lot of Afro-mestizos, right, were willing to go to places like Texas, right, and places like California. And because they went there, they were essentially allowed to jump up in the racial caste system, right, to where they were no longer had like the Afro prefix to that, right? And then if they became more wealthy, right, then they could lose the mestizo and become something, higher, right? And they would typically marry, and there was, and also in Mexico in the 19th century under Porfirio Diaz, there was actually a policy to whiten Mexico, right? That was every country in the Americas had it, but for the most part anyway. But so it's not surprising, but it is something that, again, is part of the history of Mexico, is that they did want to whiten the country, right? They did want more European immigrants to move, so then that way, but Mexico never received the kind of large scale waves of immigration that like Argentina or the United States did, right? Instead, it got a more constant rate of immigration, right? Where immigrants would always form about 1% of the population, pretty much at all times, right? Yes, in the early parts of colonization, it was the main place to move to, which is why so many people, again, are mestizo, right, so to speak. But anyway.
The Spanish people have an heritage more open to the mixture because of the Arabic presence in Spain.
The Moors were in Spain for 800 years or whatever.
Right. Yeah. So it was kind of easy to have these mixtures. And I think that's a different story from the United States.
By 1810, emboldened by the American Revolution and the French Revolution, Mexicans sought their own independence.
And the Haitian Revolution, you cannot forget. That's pretty funny, getting an upgrade of your racial caste. Well, yeah, I mean, it just goes to show, right, that the people that think that whiteness is always this like permanent thing, it can change. It can, it's always conditional, right? In fact, there are multiple things, like The Wages of Whiteness is one book that talks about this. Conditional Citizens is another book about that talks about similar concepts. The Price of Whiteness is another one, right? Like, let alone Menchaca's book, right? Which I thought I had right here, but it's not actually here. But anyway, the point being that, again, like, by being further away from where the racial caste system was its strongest, right, in the colonial heartland, that meant that it sort of speaks to the fact that in liminal spaces, right, like in the borderlands, right, people are able to sort of do more things, right? They're sort of able to be different than they would be, say, in, you know, like the way how people are in the densely populated east coast of the United States, as opposed to in the more rural, you know, especially along the U.S.-Mexico border, is very different, right? So who gets to be counted as whatever takes a different tone, right? Same thing with, you know, any frontier. But there was this desire, I mean, it was an incentive, however, right? It became an incentive because that's putting more, right, bodies, so to speak, in the colonies, right, in the provinces that are rather, you know, underpopulated by Spaniards, right? You know, from California to New Mexico, for some parts of New Mexico. And so giving them land grants and everything, to the point where, you know, they were able to be part of the starting of communities there, right? Like, that was really important. In fact, here in LA, we have the Pico Rivera, right? We have that intersection, right? But the Pico family started off in, you know, when it was taken over by the United States. I mean, their family, when they came to California, they were Afro-mestizos. So, like, literally, one of the most famous streets in LA, and one of the largest landowners of land at the time of the, you know, illegal U.S. occupation and theft of, you know, Mexican land, was actually of African heritage. He was Afro-mestizo. But they never teach that in California history. They just say he was Mexican, right? Because Mexican itself has become racialized, right? But he was an Afro-mestizo, right? So that's another thing to add, right? Like, a lot of this history, like, it's there, but it's never really addressed because the two things are never put together, right? Because the idea of African heritage is something that people, like, usually when they move to these border colonies, right, so to speak, or frontier colonies, wanted to drop that, right? They wanted to rid themselves of the sort of prejudice that they would have of being, right, of being considered black. So,
but it would take time.
So the War of Independence, 1810, 1821.
Yes, it was a very long war.
The revolution was started by a priest named Father Hidalgo. He called for the abolition of all castes, saying Indians, mulattoes, and other castes all will be known as Americans.
Oh, yeah, but this flag right here, the one that's red and black, this one is fire. Like, I've always, like, I saw it once, because, like, in Mexico, like, when you go to, like, El Mercado de Subastos or whatever, like in Mexico City, Mercado de la Merced or whatever, I once saw someone selling this flag, but, it's like red and black, and it has, like, it's really cool. I'm like, this flag, this is the flag right here. That's the flag that I like. One thing I also sort of think about too is, like, I find it weird that, like, now, right, wearing sort of clothes like a sarape, right, is seen as, like, strange even in Mexico, unless you're in a very rural area. I see that as a kind of, like, negative thing that's happened over time, because you see how beautiful they can be right here, right? But, you know, but anyway.
After he was killed, his cause was taken up in succession by two generals, a priest named Jose Maria Morelos and Vicente Guerrero.
In fact,
both of them were of African heritage, and Vicente Guerrero in particular was essentially about our, I forget, the third president of Mexico, something like that. And so, you know, I remember once, however, someone tried to compare him to Obama, but I'm like, I don't think you can make that comparison, because, like, that's in the, like, 1820s, like 1824, and you're trying to compare to some person in 2010, right? Like, I don't think that fits. Like, I get what you're trying to say, but it's not quite exactly what I think you want to say.
Both were Afro-descendants.
Wait a minute. Two black people were generals in the War of Independence.
Yes.
So this is like George Washington.
So yeah, it would be akin to, again, like the main generals of the American Revolution being black. right? That is the history of Mexico that is often completely ignored, completely, overlooked, right? And even whitewashed or, mestizo washed in some ways. Because there is this desire to make it seem like the Mexican identity that was created in the late 19th and particularly the early 20th century extends back right through time, and that's not how that works. But yes, and in fact, it was them who won independence. Oh yeah, right here, this flag. See the flag that has the skull and it's red and black? I love this flag. Like, I want this flag. I need this flag in my life. I'm like, this is our flag. This right here. This is my flag.
Being black.
Yes.
For Americans.
Yes.
That's astonishing.
Yes.
After Morelos was killed by the Spanish in 1815, the Negro Guerrero, as his enemies mockingly called him.
And yes, that is what they would call him. Looks like a pirate flag? Yeah. But, like, the fact that it was a revolutionary flag, right, makes it even better. Like, I'm just like, that's the flag. That is our flag. That is my flag. Like, I want to fly that right now. I think it's cool anyway. But yeah, they would literally call him this. But remember, guerrero in Spanish means warrior, right? So when they said this, right, in mocking, right, they're not just mocking his surname, right? Again, often people don't know the meaning of Spanish surnames, even though they're also European as well, just as like Smith is a European surname, but his is warrior. So by calling him this, right, they were saying that he was incapable of defeating the pure-blooded, white Spanish people, right, in battle, right, because he was black. He was a black warrior, right?
Saw the war to its conclusion with the help of many black Mexicans. In one story, Guerrero's father beseeched him to surrender to the Spanish. In front of his men, he answered, "You are my father, but the country comes first." La patria es primero is now a famous phrase throughout Mexico.
Yes.
And indeed, that is a famous phrase. La patria es primero, or aquí empieza la patria. Like, those are... But La patria es primero is very, very, very important. And in fact, it's in Guerrero where the national flag in the town of Iguala, where that's where the national flag was first became a thing. So, random question. Is there a relationship between aloha and hola? No, there isn't one. Because hola comes from Spanish, right? And it's a different, language family. But you do have, you do see the evidence, right, of what is often called the Melanesian languages, right? Although I don't like to necessarily, there are many ways to talk about this language family, right? But the one which extends from Taiwan, right, the island of Taiwan, and out to, all of the southern Pacific and also all the way to Madagascar, right? Where you have mahalo in Hawaii, right? And then you have mahala in Taiwan. Like, you can see that it's the relationship of the languages, right? Because they all derived from a common source, right, back in Taiwan. But as for hola, that's as far as I know, there is no connection, other than they sort of sound alike.
And in fact, in 1830, Guerrero stopped slavery by writing the law in the Constitution.
33 years before.
Yeah, so again, in principle, it was abolished, but there was no law, so to speak, no 13th Amendment that existed, so, on that level. But Hidalgo called for the end of slavery as well, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind, yes, this was when the Constitution that came after the one of the 1824 one, which officially in 1829, actually, I don't think it's 1829 and 1830, right, had it officially recorded in its text that slavery was abolished, but it had already been abolished in principle in 1810, right? And essentially had started to, essentially had stopped really existing in most of the country because of the fact that so many people did want to fight against the Spanish. So
before Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Yes. Also, an important thing about Guerrero is that he was the second president in Mexico.
So you had your...
Yeah, so the second... Yeah, he's about to say the Obama thing. Henry, But yes, it was important, the fact that it was someone who was black that promulgated the constitutional, article, the article of the Constitution saying slavery, while made illegal in principle, is made illegal now in law, right? And I think that's an important thing to remark on, right? That's the reason why it doesn't have the out, right? It doesn't have the idea of, except in the case, except for punishment of a crime, right? Like it's, like the 13th Amendment says, slavery in the United States is, all blah, 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 is abolished in the United States, except when it is punishment for a crime, etc., right? So technically speaking, slavery does exist in the United States. It was never fully... Yeah, constitutions are also harder things to change than regular laws, right? And again, Mexico's had many constitutions, right? Kind of like France. Like Mexico and France are, in that sense, very much alike, in that we've had like multiple republics, if we can say it like that, right? And the only constitution that's lasted the longest is this one, the 1917 Constitution, which again this one inspired. Again, I'm not saying that it's it's perfect and everything, but like the only type of law I've really studied in my is constitutional law in Mexico. But I've also studied and continue studying civil law, right? But there is this idea that in essence, right, that there is no slavery at all, right? That there is no ability for people to have not pay someone, to not do all of these things, right? But again, this constitution, which influenced the Soviet one, the one that most people like, the one that people is the one that got rid of the the Tsarist laws against like the sodomy laws, etc., right? It got rid of those, etc. So
Barack Obama in 1830.
That's right.
So once again, Mexico is the head of the United States.
Yes, of course.
That's amazing.
Imagine if George Washington and John Adams had been African Americans. Would we have needed a civil rights movement? When Guerrero, who was a mulatto...
I mean, I would say yes, but just because of how the United States is. I don't know. That's just my... But, I don't, The difference also is the fact that the very idea of the... just because there's a black president doesn't mean that there isn't a struggle for civil rights. And this is even shown today in Mexico, where, yes, our second president was black. However, he was a mulatto, but still, point being that, or he would be considered one. However, the discrimination against Afro-Mexicans and, and other peoples that are of African heritage, right, still exists in a huge way. So, again, it's
Abolish slavery. He also eliminated racial categories from birth, marriage, and death certificates. Today, there are states and towns all over Mexico named after Morelos and Guerrero.
In fact, there is a state called Morelos, right? And the town where he was, I remember the one he was born in, got changed from Valladolid, right, which is a name of a town in Spain. Usually people like the founders of the European settlements in Mexico, right? Very often they would name the city that they founded or whatever, right, after where they were from, right? So, like Guadalajara, right? It's most people know Guadalajara, Mexico, more than they know Guadalajara, Spain. But Guadalajara, Spain, is actually based on is literally comes from Arabic. So, because like people have heard of the term like wadi, right, which means like a stream or like a riverbed, right? So there you have like wadi, right? It's like in the word, right? But same thing with Valladolid. Valladolid is a city in Spain, but after the independence movement, right, it changed itself to Morelia, right, to be named after, right, its famous son, so to speak. So, trying to see if I can find the one where it says about like where in the Constitution it talks about this, but yeah, because there's like there's one part here, nobody can be obliged to give their own work without just there is that, but there is one that the state cannot permit that it takes effect in any contract, pact, or convention which has the object the loss or irrevocable sacrifice of liberty of that person for whichever cause, right? So that's part. I mean, this is part of it, but there's another part of the Constitution that goes more in depth on that. But the idea that racism was over because a rich lawyer who happened to be black was elected president is ludicrous, right? Another thing too is Obama and et al., right? Like same thing with like he went to the forcing house of the American civil service, right? It's like going to Eton and then going to Oxford in England, right? So it doesn't mean that his election, and I don't want to give the impression that what he did and stuff like that. Like for example, the Affordable Care Act, by way of removing the idea of like pre-existing conditions and blah blah blah, right? Like letting people stay on their parents' insurance until they're 26, etc., right? Those were positive steps. But now I think we're at the point where the public is very conscious of the fact that we need something more than what we have right now. And if we had a lot of more activism happening at this moment, I definitely think it could be one of the things that people could focus on, right, to try to get Medicare for all. But it's not the end of the fight. Again, there is a book by Jody Melamed that talks about this called Represent and Destroy, right, where it's this idea that like the United States likes to put people of color, right, in positions when it has to do things, right? Like for example, like the representative of the United States, both prior and now, during the genocide in Gaza, right? They particularly chose people of color, right? Because they want to be like, well, you can't, you know, it's not some white guy doing it, right? It's a black woman or whatever, blah, blah, blah. But Jody Melamed talks about racial capitalism, right? How like the usage and the representation of people, right, itself is used to perpetuate the very system that it enables and continues white supremacy, right? So everyone knows New York, but I don't think everyone knows York in England. Well, I know of York in England, but I also have a negative association with it, if only because of what happened to the Jewish people there a while ago, you know, historically. So
Morelos is even on the 50 peso bill, but many Mexicans...
Is Morelos still on the 50 peso bill? Let me see. I think that's technically... Yeah, no, they took him off. Yeah, they took him off, see? This used to have Morelos' face on it. Now it has the, you know, the famous story of the Aztecs right there. What are you doing? Where it shows the, you know, the eagle eating the serpent and blah, 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 right? Fundación de Tenochtitlan representando el periodo histórico del México Antiguo. The foundation of Tenochtitlan representing the historical period of ancient Mexico. So yeah, so they got rid of him, and now it actually has like I don't know, it's kind of hard to make out, but like you can see the Templo Mayor in the background, right? So it shows how you know, Tenochtitlan used to look like, right? But yeah, they don't have doesn't have Morelos anymore. Before it did, however, it did used to have Morelos. I'm trying to see, maybe on the 20 peso bill they might have people. Yeah, maybe he's in this one. I can't really tell, but this one is the 20 peso bill, and it's about people entering triumphantly into you know, winning independence. The solemn and peaceful entrance of the Army of the Three Guarantees to the city of Mexico on the day of the 27th of September of the memorable year of 1821. So I'm thinking that this Morelos is present in this depiction here, but yeah, he's not on the 50 peso bill anymore. He used to be, though. And yes, I do collect you know, money. Like that's always been like one of my things to collect like foreign currency. But recently Mexico's actually been getting like winning awards because of like how like nice, I guess, like our money is. So, you know, it's kind of interesting actually. But just for the last one, I'll show the 100 because it's the only other one. So this person here, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, she used to be on the 200 peso bill, but now it has Miguel Hidalgo and someone else. I can't remember. But Miguel Hidalgo used to be on the 1,000 peso bill. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. But yeah, they've been winning awards. I do like though that they have like, you know, the monarch butterflies, which I wish that they would protect more. Like I swear, like I've always wanted to go see the butterflies in Michoacan, but German money was so boring. Fortunately, the euro notes are better. Yeah, I mean, they're definitely... I just wish that they would like put more things in them. You know what I mean? Like I think that oh wait, actually, you know what? I do have a commemorative coin. Maybe he's there? Oh yeah. I don't know, you can't really see it. It's kind of far away. But it's Hidalgo, Morelos, and Guerrero. And this is to celebrate 200 years of independence. So, I need to put that on one of those little coin things. But anyway, so now that we're, so now that we finished talking about Mexico, I was thinking that we could move over to be honest, I'm not sure I ever looked at the notes. But they're colorful. Yeah, my childhood was marked with a fascination. Ooh. Oh yes, they're so beautiful. In Mexico, they have that forest in Michoacan, and I hate that because of NAFTA and other things, right? They kind of had to rewrite they kind of had to promulgate a law that, changed a little bit of the Constitution to where, like they could do things in certain protected areas, right? And so I've always really liked, I've always wanted to go there because, again, it's like right now, like during like winter time, right? That all of the trees are just covered in butterflies, the entire forest, and it's so beautiful. And you can just walk throughout, the entire forest, and it's just monarch butterflies everywhere. Hello, you were just lurking. It's okay.
This is Rwanda, a thousand hills paradise, the country I was born in. 30 years ago, when I was 2 years old, the genocide was committed here. My parents and a big part of my family were killed.
So, if people don't know, we saw a few of them here in Canada. Oh yeah, like they come south for the winter, and that's why I really wish that they would stop degrading their habitat, because a lot of like American companies, like wanted to build in that area because they're like, oh, well, there's nothing really going on here, just a whole bunch of bugs. And it's just like, what? Like, they're butterflies, okay? And butterflies and hummingbirds and all of that stuff, like those are all seen as very important things in like Mexica Nahua culture, as well as other cultures in Mexico. So that's one thing I've always sort of liked, is the idea that if it was, that butterflies are, sort of, same thing with hummingbirds, right? They're sort of representatives of, like, hummingbirds, for example, represent the god Huitzilopochtli, right? Which is like the god of, it's like the god of war, and I mean other things too, but that's the first thing that came to mind. But yeah, this is the Hutu implemented. Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about Rwanda. We're not going to go through this entire thing, just a little bit, because this documentary goes into the colonial nature of the reason why the very categories of Hutu and Tutsi came to be, right? Like they were not things that the people themselves necessarily came to identify themselves with. Rather, through pseudoscience. Again, one of the things that I am very much against is race science. It is all pseudoscience. DNA tests don't tell you anything. Stop being like, oh, I'm 2% this, 16% that. Like, stop, please. That is not, like, those percentages do not define who you are, right? You are yourself, and as your family has constructed itself over time, right, etc., like, that is who you are, not some random test that they could just, yeah. Anyway, I don't like race science. A friend from Rwanda told me the occupiers just split people into Hutu and Tutsi based on body height. It was, but it was also based on certain racialist theories, right? And of course, as a person whose own work, particularly when it comes to genocide studies, but also, of course, as a historian, I often have to deal with the effects of, this categorization, as we saw in Mexico, right? Like you saw there, right? All of the different castes, right? They tell you made up things about made up things. Yeah, it's a slippery slope to eugenics. Also, yeah. Like I remember watching this one commercial. I think it was for the 23andMe or whatever one. And there was a guy that he's like, I'm Croatian, you know. I believe that's what the commercial said, right? And that he's like, I was raised Croatian, I eat Croatian food, I speak Croatian, blah blah blah, right? Whatever. I went on my honeymoon to Croatia, whatever, blah, 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 right? Then he said that, but then I took the 23andMe DNA test, and it turns out I'm actually German, right? And then you see him, then like the next scene, right? It cuts and goes to the next scene, and it's him dressed up in lederhosen, right? Like a Bavarian, right? And him like doing like a jig, it turns out I'm actually, German. And I'm like, that's not how identity works, bro. That's not how yeah, it was an actual commercial. I'm like, that is not how that works. You don't suddenly find out that you're something like that. Like it's one thing in the previous thing we were talking about where, well, for the commercial, it was not meant ironically, but, but again, like in the video we were watching before with Dr. Gates, right? Henry Louis Gates Jr., if you want to like look up his work and stuff, but that is where people again have created different ways to say that they have African heritage, right? They say they call themselves morenos, or they call themselves anything else but really recognize their blackness, right? Their African heritage. And even for those of us that have, for example, are big proponents on bringing attention to Afro-Mexicans and to, trying to end the racism and colorism that exists in Mexico, right? So that we can celebrate and begin to undo, because it definitely will never be done anytime soon, but begin to question and challenge, right, these ideas about blackness in Mexico, so that no longer does our grandmother have to be in the closet, right? You know what I mean? And of course I'm using it because, that's what they used in the video, not because like there's actually someone in the closet, but you know what I mean, right? Like, that's actually why a lot of race stuff, like in terms of like critical race theory or, studies about critical whiteness studies, etc., right, often uses terminology from queer theory, because in a way, whiteness being so hegemonic views alterity as queerness, right? So it's a very interesting. That's why I always recommend Jody Melamed's work, because I think Represent and Destroy really, really goes into that very well. Well, is why I always say it's not a universal thing in the scientific world. Race shouldn't be a thing. Yeah, it shouldn't be a thing. It's not real. Like, honestly, like I just don't see why. But there are some people that default to it, like even though they're very educated and everything, and they, it's, again, there's no such thing as a person who is a non-racist, who's not racist, right? You have to be anti-racist. You have to be fighting against, all of the presumptions and all of these things that exist, around you and within you, right? And about you, so to speak, right? Like that is the only way you can do that. You can't be not racist. You can be anti-racist, right? Is something that has to be done constantly, right? Because if you don't do that, right, if you don't actually think about, like your own position, etc., right, like why you hold these beliefs, why you do these things, etc., etc., and also fighting against hegemonic whiteness etc., right? And racism and, you know, the exploitation of peoples, etc., you know, all of these things. This is why, to me, the idea of an intersectional leftist, right, sort of is a very good way of defining yourself, right? Because you can be multi-tendency. And again, I used to be the director of a multi-tendency leftist organization, right, in Mexico. And, you know, we had people that were very, you know, multi-tendency, right? Anarchists of different sorts, you know, socialists, some people that were, you know, more of the, like, we're going to call ourselves communists, right? All of that stuff, right? And I respect all of them, because our rule was everything we agree on, that's what we're going to do here, right? That's what's important here in this building, right? If you want to study, you know, Kropotkin at your own thing, right? Okay, go do that. There's no problem, right? We can all be together, right? You don't have to be fighting against one another. We can be, as it were, multi-directional, right? Intersectional leftists, right? And so it was actually very, very, it actually ended up being quite a success insofar as we had a mutual aid network that was able to, and I kid you not, because my parents at this time had actually had hens, right? So, so I could, you know, and so we would, you know, have people that were all over the city at the time, that they could be able to, if they had a car, right, that they could use that day. If they could go pick up food, right, then they would go pick up food, right? But we're all helping each other, right? Because we're all pooling our resources together, right? Because some people don't have cars, but some people do, right? So the people that do, if they need a little help, you can bring someone that doesn't have a car but wants to help, right? Everything we have to work together. And this was during the pandemic as well. So that's how we got masks out. That's how we got hand sanitizer. That's how we got food. That's how we got all of these things. Because we said, if we disagree on anything, fine. That we can go read our theory texts in our own, you know, club meeting, so to speak, outside. But when we're here, everything we agree on, that is what we are focusing on. That is the only thing that we should, you know. Yeah, united we stand, divided we fall. Because one of the main things is what has been the result of all the failures of past times we've tried to organize together, is that we let what is different about us dictate, right, how we relate to each other, right? Not the other way around, right? That instead of seeing what's common in us, right, the desire to fight against capitalism and its horrors should be first, right? Because how we approach it in other ways outside of this mutual aid, or, you know, operation in particular, is a whole different story, right? So, oh well. I knew someone who went as a photojournalist to Rwanda in '94. Oh wow. Let's see. The term race is also grossly misused by abusing a biological term that has an entirely different meaning. Well, originally, and I've mentioned this before, let me just transition over really quick, so when it was first used, right, like particularly in medieval Iberia, right, it actually took the idea of race or raza from different types of grapes, right? Because when we're talking about breeds of dogs, right? Because in English you say breeds of dogs, but in Spanish you say razas de perros, right? Races of dogs, right? You know, it's like you know, but it shows that the idea of whatever race is, right, did not originate to describe human beings, right? It actually came from sheep herding. Oh yeah, Hundrasse. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah, Hundrasse. It came particularly from vineyards, right? From sheep herding. In fact, there's a book called Spanish Arcadia that talks about this, right? Where their idea of a sheep herder right, of a pure, right, sheep, right, sort of went to define how they saw race over time, right? Same thing with horses, right? Because there's this idea of pedigree, right? But what does pedigree really mean, right? You know, again, that's where all this stuff sort of derives from. Then you take it, you know, stuff that was placed on varieties of grape and, you know, on horses, and then place it onto human beings, and you essentially have this idea that there is such a difference, right? Or you try to make there be differences. And that's one of the big problems, you know. It's like the EU pooling sovereignty makes us all stronger, sadly, clearly not more humane. Our differences are a strength, not a weakness. Right, I mean, like, that's why I think Yanis Varoufakis' desire to, you know, make the EU become more democratic and, you know, to not just scrap the whole institution, right, but instead to work so that, you know, that the structures become more transparent and democratic is, you know, I think it's actually something that could be done, right? Because again, the organization's already there, right? Do you already have the European Parliament? You already have these structures there, right? There's no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, right? Yeah, and it's already been done to an extent, and it, you know, and a lot of it has been done because, again, you have the Democracy in Europe Now movement, or the Democracy in Europe movement, DM 24 or something like that, that, you know, essentially wants to use the EU as a tool to, you know, get rid of, you know, like, to no longer need, you know, to make the Schengen treaty, right, like a permanent thing where nobody can ever, you know, create those invisible lines again, right? Where, you know, you can't have the direct imperialism of, you know, member states like Greece, etc., right? DM25, yeah, that's right. Thank you so much. The EU Parliament has much more power than it used to, and also, like, even like the EU Court of Human Rights, right? Like, that is something that to me is like, wow, okay, that's a little unfair. I felt the EU, the asylum laws would be probably even worse. I mean, as evidenced by the United States, right? Like, the United States literally gets to define who is a. No, I know that it's not a EU thing, and if I made it sound that way, then I apologize. I was perhaps confusing it. But no, the European Court of Human Rights vis-a-vis asylum, you know. But no. Thank you. I must have mixed them up. I must have included it in that. So yeah, my apologies. It was my mistake. Yeah, like the idea, right, that like in the United States, right, like right now that it's talking about doing mass deportations, right, you would think that under international law, the way how it treats, right, refugees and people that would count as refugees, for example, like during the 60s, right after Tlatelolco in particular, during the Dirty War, which was, Mexico's one of the few countries where they still call it that, because in Argentina, they don't let you, that it's seen as insulting to call it the Dirty War, right? But because it was a US-backed right-wing dictatorship, right, they didn't let people claim asylum from it, from Mexico, even though people were running away from it. But they did let people claim asylum from Cuba, right? So you can see, I mean, in the same way that they don't grant asylum to people from Haiti, right? But they do for people from Cuba to this day, right? It reminds me, dog shows and pedigree are kind of ridiculous since pure dogs often have health. Right, exactly. Like, that's one of those things where, like, everything eugenical, to put it in, to use that term that hasn't been used since like the 40s, involves this like weird attachment to this idea of pedigree being applied to human beings. But one, it already presumes that some human beings have pedigree, which they don't. we're all related to everybody else, right? All of us. So, like, sure, you can take a specific population and say, well, it's less related to this one. Fine. But it doesn't change the fact that there is, I mean, that's the reason why they had the idea of the Lebensborn project, right, in Germany. The European Court of Human Rights is definitely a lot better than not having it. Yeah. That some of their decisions are pretty grotesque. Yeah, I mean, look, like sometimes I wonder whether, like the other day I was talking in VC, which by the way, you should join the Discord because every day I'm usually in VC now to chat. I was thinking about, because someone told me maybe you should go back to school, which I'm not going to do. I already have a PhD, okay? Like I'm done with school, right? But the idea of being like a human rights lawyer, right, for in international law, it's like, yeah, that sounds cool. Like that sounds like something I would do, right? Because that is something that is important to me, right? Like I read the human rights reports. I mean, I read the most recent one by Human Rights Watch, where now, so Amnesty International already said what's happening in Gaza is a genocide. And again, that's me saying it as a genocide study scholar, historian, right? They say it's a genocide. Now you have Human Rights Watch, right, which is another big organization that just published a report saying it's genocide. Like literally, it's in the title, right? So the fact that the leading human rights organizations can no longer euphemize it or try to, or even I'm not saying that they did, but the fact that it's just so blatant now shows just how disastrous it is, right? That we do the same on Poland, EU, Ukraine border with EU support, welcomes refugees as long as they're white. I mean, look, like I myself, as someone who wants to leave the United States because, there's a lot of uncertainty, or especially in my neighborhood, because again, my neighborhood's very Mexican, right? There are people here that are, dreamers and everything, or DACA, etc., blah blah blah, and they're afraid because they very well could be deported to a country they've never been to, right? Because they've never been allowed to travel outside of the United States because of that status that they have. So, then I start to think, being a human rights lawyer in international law sounds like a way to, it sounds interesting. But I don't think I could go through a full thing of school again, right? I'm tired already. I mean, I really do just want to, like, I wish that it was easy to move and to find shelter, a safe harbor somewhere where I could just do my research and stuff. Like, that's really, But, yeah, it's, it's not easy, especially not right now. Again, if you'd like to help me out, you can always do so using the links in both chats, because I do have an emergency fund on Throne to try to make sure that I can pay my bills and everything, because this is a very strange time of the year for me. And again, I'm sorry to have to continue to keep asking, but again, if you could help me in some way, I would really appreciate it. Truly, I am so... It means so much to me, the fact that anybody has ever given anything to me. And so, again, just know that if you do give, that, again, it's for making sure that that I can, just have everything, that I need. My basic needs met, so to speak, because it doesn't feel good at all to even ask, to be quite honest, but I have no real choice. So, anyway, that gives me an idea. We fund a border wall and authorities prosecute non-NGOs. Yeah, like to me, I think that like when the Mexican government responds to Trump saying, if you deport Mexicans, we will only take in Mexicans, not anybody else, right? That they won't, that Mexico won't allow itself to be called a safe third country, right? That's when you start to get a little bit like, oh, so you would be willing to collaborate, right? You just don't want to do it with, you just don't want to do it in this particular, way, right? So, that also doesn't feel very good. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for the hug. Yeah. Again, like I said, if you would like to help me out, you can. Obviously, you don't have to. You're not at all. Enjoying to do so, but I would really appreciate it if people would help me out right now. So they won't take in other Latinx peeps. Apparently not. The thing is Mexico. You know how they had like the stay in Mexico policy. Well, which one is breaking international law, but two, essentially Mexico doesn't want to become a safe third country because then the United States will just deport everybody to the Mexican border, right? Because before it used to say, oh, like some countries wouldn't take their citizens back if they were in the United States, like Iran, for example, right? Or other places. They just wouldn't take in the deportees, right? But remember, the last time that there were mass deportations of Mexicans, particularly in the United States, most of them were U.S. citizens, either natural born citizens, right? Naturalized citizens or documented people, right? Over 60%. So they weren't Mexicans, right? They weren't Mexican citizens. They weren't, those things. Okay. So the over 3 million people that were forcefully expelled back in the 30s and the 50s, right? During the Decade of Betrayal and Operation Racial Slur, right? They were not being repatriated, as the United States likes to call it. But yeah. Yeah, totally. Look, if I had the opportunity, I would so, because again, like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think at some point I'm going to have to do a big, like a book project about sort of like, both human rights, talking about, right, the border, and then another one talking about Palestine. Like, I think it's just, I have ideas for them. I already have, like, ideas, but it's obviously going to take a long time, but yeah. And my English would help a lot there. Yeah, definitely. I mean, hey, helping an asylum lawyer, that's good work, right? It's worthwhile work for sure. The law is usually an extended length degree. Yeah, I mean, again, I also couldn't do it right now because if I wanted work, right, if I had to teach again, because I usually adjunct, then I wouldn't be able to like attend the classes as they showed up, right? So there's that. Well, Mexico doesn't have a choice in taking back its own citizens, right? Well, I mean, yeah. In a sense, yeah, it doesn't. But like I said before, like the border patrol and all of that stuff, they will often. I mean, we're talking about the United States, where once there was a chyron on Fox News that Trump was going to suspend aid to 3 Mexican countries, right? So, like, again, the Americans think that everything, beyond the wall is Mexico. So. Yeah, I mean, again, a lot of them don't want to go to Mexico, but the idea would, by quote unquote taking them in, Mexico would help Trump, not these individuals on one level. On another level, they'd probably rather be in Mexico than in a U.S. concentration camp. Right, and again, if you've read the article, Concentration Breakdown, Auschwitz Part 2, you would know the federal complaints of, again, this was done in 2020, so I'm sure it's gotten worse now. But, like, the federal complaints that are there are horrifying. Horrifying. So, anyway.
In April 1994, the Rwanda...
Pakistan also deported around 2 million Afghans living there. Southeast Asian countries are not taking in Rohingya refugees. Things are looking quite bleak. Yeah, I mean... yeah.
The government mobilized the Hutu population to massacre their Tutsi neighbors. 1 million people were murdered in just 100 days.
This is why this has often been called, up until Gaza, the fastest genocide in history. But Gaza was able to, like, in terms of, like, how, like, the rate of casualties and everything, was able to surpass that of Rwanda. At least I believe so, from what I've read at some point. Yeah, I've read about what happened at the U.S. southern border, which is why I use that term. It's funny, once I sent a colleague that article, and they actually said they didn't like the comparison. And I'm like, well, what would you compare it to? You read what it says in there. What do you, like, if they're spraying chemicals on people, right? And all of that stuff, right? So... what are the... yeah. The question marks, Keiki? What are they referring to?
The Rwandan society was divided into 3 so-called ethnicities: Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa. I'm on a journey to find out about the roots of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. My name is Samuel Ishimwe. I'm a filmmaker. Why were my parents killed? I knew they were killed by the militia, but I didn't know why. And as a kid, I just thought it was war. But when I was 13, 14, 15, I started really asking questions to my family and reading books. And yeah, that's how I started understanding, okay, they were killed because of their ethnicity, because they were Tutsi. If we speak the same language, share the same culture, same country, how did we become different? What was our identity before Germans and Belgians came to colonize Rwanda at the end of the 19th century? Who divided us into Tutsi, Hutu, and Twa? Was it ourselves, or was it colonialism? How did we get to the point where people killed their neighbors, or killed their cousins, or killed their wives? How was this hate planted?
By the way, I just have to say, like, Rwanda is such a beautiful country. Like, I wish I could visit. And I mean, one thing I would also do would, of course, be to visit its archives of the, the genocide and everything, because I've always wanted to, I mean, like, I think to me it's like one of those things where it's like, you almost just, I don't know, it's just one of those things where, like, again, the fact that it was, at a time that it was being televised and that, the UN could do nothing, and, and then you see that with, like, with Lebanon and with Gaza and with other places, and it's just like, I don't know, it's very upsetting. Yeah, they have.
waje niyo muri kino kintu kirekire.
Oh, I like her like head covering. It's so nice. I like the like lace look of it. Or the lace. The USA denied it was a genocide, evade having to do something. Yeah. I mean, for example, like under like the ICJ and all of that stuff, like, well, like the Cambodian genocide isn't considered a genocide, even though it is one. But because they're like, well, they technically didn't, you know, they weren't, you know, an ethnic group and blah, 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 you know.
This is Beata. She was my nanny during the genocide. She took care of me and my younger brother Daniel. She saved us.
Elle les a trouvés avant d'arriver ici. Leurs parents venaient d'être assassinés. La bonne avait réussi à s'enfuir avec les deux petits. Pendant 2 mois, ils ont vécu cachés dans les marais. Il leur fallait échapper à ceux qui traquaient les Tutsis, les adultes, les enfants.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what, which again is interesting considering like it was European colonial powers that insisted, right, that there was a supposed difference between the Tutsis and the Hutus and the Twa. I want to say, I'm not sure about that. Kicking, it's not coming to my mind immediately. Oh, do you mean now? If you mean now, I believe so, yeah.
We are with my uncle, Venust. He raised us after the genocide. Every time we are together, we discuss what we went through.
Et puis un jour, elle a vu un jeune homme se précipiter sur les 2 enfants. C'était un...
Imagine like watching footage of yourself, right, as a child, having just survived a genocide. Like, that's just one of those things where it's just like, you know, the fact that we see what's happening in Gaza being live streamed every day, and you see these like little babies and, you know, little children, and it's just like the idea that, you know, if they get the chance to grow up, and I hate having to talk in this weird subjunctive way, you know, that they will look back at this, what's going on, and I don't even know how I would feel, you know.
Ils ont décidé de rester ensemble.
yafite umusatsi ugize ukuntu noneho nyine bikagaragara ko ari umututsi turavuga tuti umwana reka tumwogoshe dadu noneho hano ari akazosi nk'ak'umusambi turavuga tuti twiga inama yo kumukura umusatsi afite umusatsi nyine wafunga shinya kuko tubajya tuturaho bambaza bati wowe bite wowe n'undi ngende mushiki wanyu ngende umutukazi pe ngo hanyuma singizo nyenzi zozo ngo ziyetse niki ndavuga.
And yes, the language that they're using here, cockroaches, etc., right, the comparison to vermin, yes, this is part of the dehumanization process. In the same way that someone saying these people are coming in and they are poisoning the blood of our country also is dehumanizing language. Did the resolution become worse, or is it just me? It's on 1080p for me, so I don't know. I think it's just the camera that they took it on itself. Because it's
only a few meters from where my uncle lives now is the family house. We lived here until the genocide.
buriya n'ubu ngubu ubona igihe gishize iyo mpuye n'umuntu kuri agagenda n'ibipanga kuri pa yaberereka baca hirya mbona nyine ari bonye.
you know, as a, like, you know, you saw the statue of Yanga, right? The escaped African slave that eventually created the first free town, in the colonized Americas, right? What did he have in his hand? A machete, right? Like in Latin America, a lot of, like, all the time, like I think about when I go to coconut to go get agua de coco, right? Like they will get like a fresh coconut, right? And with a machete they'll go all this, to get rid of all the husk of it, and then make it so that they can and then put the straw. Then they let you drink it, right? And you drink it and it rehydrates you. Then you give it back to them, and then they start to like cut it apart and scoop out all of the meat, as they call it sometimes, and cut it up, and you can put limon and salt and hot chili flakes and salt and whatever all you want, and you eat it. That's how and like, to me, the idea of like the machete has had positive, I mean, as much as anything can, because a lot of indigenous and Afro-Mexican resistance historically has been done vis-a-vis, has been done with machetes, right? So
ari we wenyine na nyirya nyine
ariko afite umupanga yitambukira
mba mbona nyine ko
and it's from the panga
this uzi kugira ngo ubone umuntu yicundi
so cyo hano mu kibone ho babashuye
I mean, another thing too is like it's a tool indeed. Going into the jungle, thick vegetation, it's a must. Yeah. I mean, same thing with just so many things. Like if, but it's also, but because of what happened in Rwanda, which again, it wasn't the only time that this violence had ever happened. It was the scale of the violence, right? Right? It's like there had been previous, like for example in Europe, there had been previous pogroms against the Jewish people, expulsions, etc. But what was different about what happened during the Nazis was the sheer scale of it, right? That is what was a huge difference, right? So, Midi, I see that you're posting links, but what is it about?
kari duhagaze gutya nari mpagaze gutya ngewe namwe nyine ndetse gufashe gutya akaboko hanyuma nyine bamutsinda ku kinuze cyaraho kimwe cy'indimo aho hari akantu kameze nk'umugina ndabona hari naho haciye bugufi aribwo mama wanjye yasimbukaga nyine kugwa kuri ubwo rugo bahita bamushushubikanya bamugarura nawe bamukubira nyine we banamunaze amataraho
8 years later, the bodies of my parents were found here. They were exhumed to be buried at the Kigali Genocide Memorial.
So, it's like planes. My grandma was scared of low-flying planes most of her life because she was born in 1938. For the first part of her life, low-flying planes meant death and destruction, yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, no. I just wanted to know, like, what it was, because, before I click on it, because, like, I've had it where, like, people send me stuff, and they're like, oh, actually, we didn't intend for you to watch it on stream, right? Because it was, like, wait, give me a second. Yeah, no, I know what you mean, because, like, my grandparents, grew up during the war as well, so... Like, a lot of the, and again, people forget, there are Mexican Nazis. I don't know why people act like, oh, it's like they can't be Nazis. They were just called the gold shirts. That's the only real difference. Let's see here. The first one you said is the one about... Oh yeah, this is super short. Okay. So... Okay.
We have every reason to believe that acts of genocide have occurred.
How many acts of genocide does it take to make genocide?
Alan, that's just not a question that I'm in a position to answer.
True that you have...
Oh my gosh, this is literally like... Yeah.
Specific guidance not to use the word genocide in isolation, but always to preface it with this word acts of.
I have guidance which I try to use as best as I can. I'm not. I have. There are formulations that we are using that we are trying to be consistent in our use of. I don't have an absolute categorical.
Yeah, that's... Let's see.
How many acts of genocide does it take to make genocide?
How many acts of genocide does it take to make a genocide?
Alan, that's just not a question that I'm in a position to answer.
I'm sorry.
Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do with the way that you phrase that question, but let me just say again unequivocally that the allegations of genocide we find to be unfounded.
It's true that you have specific guidance not to use the word genocide in isolation, but always to preface it with this word acts of.
Today, several patients and medical workers at Ramallah Hospital in northern Gaza, one of the last remaining medical facilities, was attacked by Israeli drones. There's this harrowing image of a teenage boy in a wheelchair who was killed. This is after a week of Israeli forces killing a safe children's staffer, 3 World Central Kitchen workers, a head chef of the Gaza Soup Kitchen, an ICU director shooting a 10-year-old girl. And that's in a matter of days. And how do attacks like these that apparently are not an aberration, considering we've seen these over and over again, have anything to do with Hamas?
I have guidance which I try to use as best as I can. I'm not. I have. There are formulations that we are using that we are trying to be consistent in our use of.
I will use the hospital that you mentioned as an example. We have been incredibly clear that fighting in and around hospitals it should not happen, and that parties are called on to respect the protected status of these kinds of facilities, and that's something that we'll continue to stress additionally. The point, Prem, is that these things are not mutually exclusive. These things, we can continue to have these areas of deep concern and continue to stress and their importance and stress how there needs to be better decision making. There needs to be additional steps taken, whether it be on civilians or humanitarian situation. That does not equate to allegations of genocide being accurate or founded.
Oh gosh, that is just such... just... Double talking around the issue, yeah, it's...
tuje rero nyine dusanga nyine hano abantu bicaye bose twageze bamaze gucukura deja bashyize nyine ibiri hariya n'abandi bari ku kigo baraza bakwigena ko bari kumuza ko bari kumuza ahangaha sinjya muri abantu bambonye bagiye ubwoya umwana yifata ariko uyu mwana ibyo byose muri filime ntabwo wumva uremere bwabyo.
Like, I can't imagine also, like, returning to your home, right, where in effect, right, it is a, you know, the site of a, you know, part of this violence, this horrendous violence, right? I really can't. It's like one of those things where it's, you know, I sympathize so very much and empathize as well with all of the people that, you know, have to go back and, you know, see all of the destruction that has occurred, let alone to members of their family and everything, because this is the reason why, I mean, it's worthwhile, in my opinion, right, to do what I do, right? I might not, have a fancy job at a fancy school, but at the very least, the work that I have done and the work that I continue to do, even just streaming as well, right, which I would include in that, is, is my ability to do something. But I just can't imagine, like, knowing, right, that so
when we removed the bodies of my parents from here and other bodies also here,
I mean, like, just to say that phrase, to move the, of my parents, like, I can't imagine, like, thinking about that. You know what I mean? Like, as a child, like...
10 years old. It's very hard to explain to somebody who was not from Rwanda, because it was a very normal thing. It wasn't like a special thing. It's not like people are crying. It was just it's part of my childhood. It's a very strong memory. It's something that marks you.
Yeah, and that's why, like, looking at these sites of memory, right, is something that is very important, right? Like, it's not something that you want to forget because of the fact that, and again, there is, of course, like, the idea of, like, ressentiment, right, as our discussion with, or rather my discussion with Brooks, right, when we were talking about ressentiment, right, that there is some sort of, like, that forgetting can be liberating in some ways, but also, too, right, it also depends on the kind of memorialization that you're doing. And so that's why, like, the idea of going to Kigali and going to the genocide memorial and going into their archives and, doing some project, whether it's, of some articles or a book, I mean, that to me is something that, I would want to do. I don't know. But, yeah, anyway.
After our parents were killed, my nanny Berta escaped with me and my brother. First, we were hidden by neighbors. Later on, the soldiers of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, who were fighting the government to stop the killings, evacuated us to the stadium. It was right next to where the UN peacekeeping mission was. Today, the former head of the UN peacekeeping mission in Rwanda during the genocide is holding a speech at a youth festival in Kigali.
Yes, I had a discussion with Brooks. We've been trying to plan another one to talk about mass deportations, but I know he's been very busy. But yeah, I did on Ressentiment. If you look at it on my videos, it has a drawn picture with watercolors over, and it says talking Deleuze with, at not Brooks.
I want to meet the Canadian general who could have stopped the genocide.
No, it was formal. Oh my goodness. Oh, thank you so very much, Anonymous. Thank you so much for the donation to the emergency funds. I really appreciate that. It was formal though. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. But yeah, it was we spoke on stream, yeah.
The world had to listen to him.
He notably served as force commander of the United Nations mission for Rwanda during the 1994 genocide. Despite the UN's withdrawal, he and a small contingent remained in Rwanda to protect refugees. Please let's welcome to the stage Lieutenant General Romeo A. Delay.
That actually makes me want to ask the question, how many people in chat, I know, this is, how many people in chat have ever watched the movie Hotel Rwanda? Just curious. Just put a 1 in the chat if you have, okay?
Can you tell us about your hopes for children?
You are the potential not only of Rwanda and Africa, but you are the potential of humanity to see peace forever, and for all of us to grow happy, serene, safe, loving, For we are all equal. None of us, not one of us, is more human than the other.
And hello, welcome in, Gabby. It's so nice to see you. And okay, because Yvonne, one of our server mods, wanted to watch it after I gave some kind of, little bit of background vis-a-vis, talking about this video. But you didn't see it. So I was considering, after stream, to just, having a kind of impromptu film screening if people wanted to. But, of course, I don't even know if people would even show up, but nor would I necessarily expect them to. But because of the fact that it's, there is a lot that it doesn't really show, but it is an interesting film nonetheless. But it does have a lot of, problems. It's problematic. You watched most of it, yes. And welcome in everybody. So if you would like to see it, let me know if you want to do that after stream, but let me know.
Dahler's mission was to supervise a peace treaty to end the ongoing civil war. In 1990, exiled Tutsi refugees had started a war against the Hutu regime of President Habyarimana after they were denied the right to return home. The Hutu government spread anti-Tutsi propaganda, calling them enemies of the country, cockroaches that should be killed. On April 6, 1994, a plane carrying the president was shot down over Kigali.
One thing that isn't explained here, which I think is an important point that I wish was sort of explained here. I'd be up for that, but not tonight. Really want to get another couple of job applications out. Oh, yeah, no, like I said, it's only if people, feel like it. It's not a... Usually after stream, I'm just in chat, talking. But just because it was, brought up, is the fact that where the plane, after it was shot out of the sky, do you know where it landed? In the front yard of his own house. I'm not even joking. Of all the places in Kigali that the president's plane that had just been shot out of the sky could have landed, it landed right in front of his own house. And that is why people say, there are many people, again, I am not saying this is based off of another documentary that was done, but essentially saying that it was his wife, right? The wife of who now lives in France. Yeah. It literally landed right in front of his house. Right in front of his house, in the front yard, because he had a big estate, a big home, right? And it landed right there. But that's why people say that it was his wife that began the initial call, like the initial, domino, right, to start the genocide. That she was, had a lot of power and had the presidential guard at her disposal, right? And so when this happens, right, of course they blame the Tutsis, right? And so you begin to see it start from using the presidential guard by way of the first lady, so to speak. And so again, that's not my contention, but like I said, it is one. But of course, now she lives a cozy life with her family in France. Now lives in France and lives a very nice bourgeois existence, as do a lot of the genocidaires, like the top brass and such. They live in France with complete immunity from, so far anyway, from international law. Planes that are shot down by SAMs are usually pretty hard to control. I'd say that's I know, like, what are the odds that it would land right in front of their house? But it did. And that's why a surface-to-air missile struck one of the wings of the Dassault Falcon. Then a second missile hit its tail. In that situation, you have neither the desire nor the ability to successfully land in someone's front yard. Right, exactly. Like, the fact that it did, right, literally, astronomically, the odds are infinity to one, so to speak, right? Like, there was no way that should have been able to happen, but it did, right? And that's why people say the evidence shows that the first people that started to do the genocide, because it started after this, right? Because, of course, they blame the Tutsi rebel force, right? Is that it began with the first wife of the first lady of the president, right? His wife. That she began to start the genocide because of what just happened right in front of her, right? This was followed by a second light rising from the same place as the first, and the plane turning into a falling ball of fire, right? Right. Well, I mean, I guess if you want to put it like that, the odds are either it does or it doesn't happen. But that's only if you look at it in that. I mean, I know that you're joking, but excuse me. That would be only if it could either fall in the yard or not. Right? Not the fact that it could have landed everywhere else, including the yard, right? But yeah, anyway. But the point being that, again, like, that's why people say that it was the first lady who now lives, again, like I said, in France, under protection of the French state, that began the genocide.
The next day, Hutu extremists started to kill the Tutsi, who were around 14% of the population. They also murdered Hutus who opposed the extremist ideology and the killings.
And by the way, like, you see how they're, like, looking at people's papers? That's because they would stamp the ethnic group that you had been put in by the colonials, right? By the colonizers, right? They put that on your ID card, on your, internal passport, one might say, right? And I've always thought, isn't it so weird how America is, like, so hell-bent on always wanting you to say what race and ethnicity you are? Like, after every single time it's ever been done everywhere else. Also, it didn't land, it crashed and exploded. Right, yeah, it didn't land, well, I mean, yeah, it didn't land, but I meant, like, as in it ended up, right? It ended up right in their front yard, right? It crashed and exploded on impact, right? Which, again, the next person that had as much control as the president was his wife. If they had coincidentally prepared a landing strip and the plane had landed successfully, okay, that would not sound coincidence, right? Yeah, exactly. But no, it literally was a flaming ball of, it was just literally it was in the sky, flying. It was going to go, so I forget where it was headed to, actually. But I think it was it? I don't remember exactly, but it was to go to some meeting, right? That was supposed to be with, to sign the peace treaty, right? And it was while it was already in the air over Kigali that it got shot down. And again, like, the fact that it even fell returning from Dar es Salaam, okay, yeah. But, yeah.
What was your initial assessment and understanding of the conflict in Rwanda?
I went to meet with the Interamwe, which was the militia, which were youth, because most of the killing was done by young people. The adults, the army didn't do the killing, the gendarmerie didn't do much of the killing. They were behind it, but the killing were done by the youths, the Interamwe with machetes. They're the ones who were on all the checkpoints and so on. And they...
Well, I mean, it is interesting that he does say the Interahamwe were the ones that were, because that is technically true. But to say that the gendarmerie and and that the presidential guard were not, like he did sort of mention them, but I mean, I don't know.
He had been indoctrinated by the MRND and CDI parties, by the hardline parties, to treat the Tutsis as cockroaches. So one of the first things they did was turn human beings into insects. I said, how is it possible that you could be doing what you're doing? The slaughtering, the killing. They said, how can you come and accuse us? You white guys, you the Europeans, destroyed people and millions of Africans, including all the slavery.
And this is an interesting thing too, because it's like this critique that did occur, right, is something that a lot of people say, well, a genocide here or a genocide there doesn't really matter, right? That's not me saying it, right? I'm not saying that. Obviously, that's not me saying that they don't matter. Rather, the fact that, this is why the book, which is actually on my throne, Colonialism and Genocide, is such an important book to read. Because, yes, implicit in all of the acts of colonization of the Americas, Australia, South Africa, etc., was genocide. Like, that is what was required, so to speak, right? That is what the people deemed as a requirement. Not so much it was required out of, like, some, preordained reason, but that was something that was set in motion by the settler colonists, right? They saw it as a necessity to do that, right? To whatever extent that they did, right? It just depends on the colonial power. But again, it's any of the settler colonies, right? By definition, had ethnic cleansing and genocide. But I mean, this critique that is here, right? Like, how can you blame us if you have done this to us, right? Which again is not a really, I mean, it's not obviously not the most well-reasoned critique, right? Because it's like, on one hand, it is true, right, that it was Europeans that caused all of this harm. But it was Europeans that created the divisions between the Hutus and the Tutsis in the first place, right? So in that way, they're perpetuating the very colonial thing and that's happening by way of doing what they're doing. So that's always been one of those contentions with some scholars, that it's like, this idea that somehow it was a like decolonial aspect to it doesn't fit, like it doesn't work.
That was going on, and you've done it for a century.
Genocide here, oh yeah.
Here too. So don't come and tell us, that we are savages and so on, when you're the ones who actually initiated that type of destruction of human beings.
In January 1994, 3 months before the genocide, Dallaire was sending faxes to the UN in New York. He had information that the Rwandan government was training the militia to be able to kill 1,000 Tutsis every 20 minutes. But the international community...
Think about that. I mean, that's horrific. Right? Like, really think about that for a second. 1,000 people every 20 minutes. 1,000 people. The principal aim of the Interahamwe in the past was to protect Kigali from the RPF. Since the United Nations Armed Military Intervention Force in Rwanda mandate, he has been ordered to register all Tutsi in Kigali. He suspects it is for their extermination. Example he gave was that in 20 minutes his personnel could kill up to 1,000 Tutsis. Because again, remember, up until what's happening in Gaza, this was the fastest genocide to have ever occurred. Because it occurred within 100 days. 1 million people.
Refused to take action.
There is no negation.
And yeah, the international community refused to take action. In fact, they were even saying, we're going to take away UN peacekeepers. Right? They said, we're gonna remove the peacekeeper force. that was able to hold some of the, Interhamwe back, right? And so, and again, this person is a person who is very well respected in the international, because he was willing to put his life on the line, and he also, was in the movie they show, but there is, of course, the fact that the United Nations peacekeeping force in Rwanda was not willing to stay because they essentially had already resigned to the idea, that whatever was going to happen was going to happen. And I think, to me, that is horrifying. But we still see it to this day when it comes to the Palestinians, right?
That I left with the firm conclusion that that all humans were not being treated equally. We had put 67,000 troops in Yugoslavia, and I couldn't ultimately even keep the 450. I never got all the troops I needed. So they simply said, well, we'll see how it works out. And if they kill each other, well, it's really tribalism anyways, because it's in Africa. And that was a big argument they used. All this tribalism, it'll last a couple of weeks, and they'll kill a bunch of them, and then we'll go in, we'll throw some money, and then maybe things will be better.
Personally, meeting Dallaire was a surreal experience for me, because where his mission was, where his headquarters was, is actually like a 10-minute walk from where my family is. So it's very surreal to think that, if maybe he has got what was asked for in that time, my parents would be alive, or many other people would be alive. What do you think about it? So right now we're going to Kibira. This is where my father is from originally. So I'm going with my uncle and my aunt.
And again, I think Rwanda is such a beautiful country. I love the trees and how green it. Oh gosh, it's so sad, right? That again, I understand this is not the cheeriest subject, and I know it is what it is in a sense, but gosh, I just knowing about these things, reading about these things, having researched into them, reading the human rights reports, and seeing how you have people crying out for help. And there are people that literally just, in the most cynical manner, say that, will either deny it outright, which itself, by the way, denial of genocide, is actually an act of genocide. By the way, just so we're clear, if you know anybody who, I don't know, is anyone that's kind of trying to argue that it isn't one when it definitely is one, just know that that's technically part of genocide.
I want to go with them to understand how they get to know about their identity.
Let's see. Oh, let's see. Here we go. Let's go here. Okay, here we go. Okay, here.
The terms Hutu, Tutsi, Twa already existed before colonialism. Around 1% of Rwandans called themselves Twa. The colonizers defined them as pygmies, natives who lived here before the Hutu and Tutsi.
And it's interesting too, because again, this is in India, for example, right? There are, as they often will call them, tribal peoples, right? That are seen as the indigenous people that lived in the subcontinent before the Dravidian speaking peoples and the Indo-Aryan speaking peoples moved into the Dravidians into southern India, and then the Indo-Aryan speaking peoples into northern India, etc. And for some people, that like their idea of indigeneity is like just a question of who was there prior, right? And that's like not exactly the same thing as the way how historians define it, or how, et cetera, et cetera. But again, like the idea of the Twa being considered, in this case, pygmies, which again is a group is a people group. There are multiple peoples that have been called this. Was based on this idea that there was the great migration of the Bantu-speaking peoples, right, from West Africa down into Southern Africa. So, that's another thing to keep in mind, right? Human migration has always been, like, humans have migrated more in the lifetime of our species, if I can put it like that, than not. Like, the idea of hard borders and, blah, 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 that's a recent invention that makes no sense in accordance with human history.
Tout ce qu'on raconte à propos de ces toits, ce sont des spéculations. Il n'y a pas de source fiable. Les sources que nous utilisons sont des sources orales.
The meaning of Hutu Tutsi Twa in pre-colonial Rwanda is still debated among historians.
Comment définissez-vous les termes ethniques Hutu Tutsi Twa?
Quand la colonisation est arrivée ici, nous avions au moins 6 siècles derrière nous comme État-nation.
Yeah, so again, Rwanda had already existed in some, form. I don't know if I would call it necessarily a nation state, because that's a separate concept, but I do get what I like, again, that it did exist and that there was an identity associated with the people living within it, right? So when the Belgians get there, there's already this is why I hate when people want to pretend that like Africa somehow doesn't have an extended history, or has a complex history, right? It's like it's only complex in their view if there are marble statues, right? It's like, no, that's not how that works, right? Marble is not required. Marble does not a civilization make, right? That is just ornament.
Les gens s'étaient hiérarchisés en catégories, différentes catégories. Et ceux qui étaient riches à ce moment-là, grâce aux vaches, parce que sauvage s'appelait Tutsi, ceux qui s'appelaient les pauvres, la moyenne des gens ordinaires s'appelaient Hutu, c'est-à-dire les pauvres en fait.
On disait que Rwanda il y a 3 ethnies.
So you see that at that point, right, Hutu, Twa, and Tutsi, or Tutsi and Hutu, meant class distinction, right? It was also a division of labor, right? You had the owners of the cows, right, right? And then you had the people that worked the land, the Hutu, right? So it described a different type of social difference, not something ethnic. In the same way, like Viking, right? Viking is not... It took me a while to realize that he was speaking French. Well, I mean, of course, it's the Rwandan dialect, and, perhaps it's a bit... distinct and not necessarily easy to catch on at first, but regardless, like I was saying, like Viking, that is a profession. That is something people did. There were Vikings from all over the known world at the time. There were Muslim Vikings. There were there were African Vikings, right? Because that's something people did. That's not that. It doesn't refer to Sven from Uppsala, right, that you saw on Grindr the other day, right? Like, that's not who we're talking about.
Est-ce que on peut dire que vraiment ce sont des véritables ethnies?
Non. Et le Rwanda s'appelait, c'est une même ethnie, parce que ce qui caractérise chaque ethnie, nous remplissons toutes ces conditions ensemble. La langue, la culture, la croyance, nous avons même ce qu'on appelle les clans. Nous avons
Right, and so again, you have a clan-based society, right, which is very similar, for example, to like how, and I'm just going to quickly go over to Yemen really quickly, right, where there is a distinction, right, between Sunni clans, right, and Shia clans, right, And there is this view that it's just the accent. Yeah, no, I mean, that's what I was saying, right? Like the way in which they speak is perhaps, you know, in the same way that like some people, like I know a lot of people from, you know, from France that often find, you know, the Quebecois accent a little difficult to, you know. But regardless, as I was saying, going to Yemen, right, we have clans, right? That is a common thing, right? And you have Shia clans and you have Sunni clans. Again, that go back, and there were even some clans that have, you know, that were Jewish. I mean, again, Jewish people lived there until the Zionists literally lied to most of them and then sort of had them leave. And apparently there are still Jewish people there. I don't know, you know, there's no way to really tell, you know, but apparently there's some minor number of Jewish people that remained. But, you know, there are people that have Jewish ancestors, right, for example, in their clan. However, the major divide is between Sunni and Shia, right? As we know, the organization called Ansar Allah, otherwise known as the Houthis, right? They are Shia. They only fight with because of the Saudi and Emirati invasion of Yemen and the genocide that they committed there, and the sort of you know, the violence that is still ongoing, even though the Ansar Allah has effective control of the capital, blah blah blah, right? And again, I mean, this is why northern Yemen and southern Yemen used to be two separate countries, right? But it also means that sometimes people think that for example, in the case of Yemen, that either that one of the peoples is like an intruder and the other one isn't, right? Like, oh, one of them had to be there first, right? And that's not how that works, right? Both were there, you know, if so to speak, since time immemorial. In fact, Yemen used to be actually a long time ago a Jewish kingdom, right? That's why I'm saying, like, there are many generations. If you go back far enough, you know, people have many, you know, they have many Jewish ancestors. But that's besides the point. That, like, whether they became Shia or whether they became Sunni, you know, the reasoning for it, right, or whatever happened, you know, was dependent on a lot of different things. But it still affects the society today in the same way that it still affects the society in Rwanda and in other places where clans are a major way of, you know, understanding people, right? This is why I say don't use the term tribe, right? Like, using the word tribe is something that people think is like this universal, they can use it for any grouping of people, but it's not, right? Clan is something that's even more that's smaller, right? In the sense that clans together can be part of a tribe, right? And so but again, particularly in America, people like to say tribe for like their own family, which doesn't make any sense either. Apparently there are still Jews in Yemen. That's particularly the then nascent Jewish Agency for Israel and other organizations went to Yemen, and because the Jewish people in Yemen lived an existence that is essentially the existence that they had lived for centuries, and was exactly like that of their Muslim counterparts, and as well as, you know, the ones that were Christian or were something else, right? Because there are some Christians that lived in Aden or Hodeidah, Sana'a, whatever. They essentially did very similar things. Like, there was no real difference between them. It was the Zionists that came, right, from the, you know, from the Agency for Israel, right, and that came in and started to say that now we started this state and it has everything you could ever want and blah blah blah, all this abundant, you know, and it tried to convince people that way by selling them the Israeli dream. Polity is the trendy word. Well, polity means that there is like some amount of politics, right? There is some kind of central node of power somewhere, right? Because like Florence, right, as a city-state, that's a polity, right? But it's not just, you know, but yeah, no, I get what you mean though. So anyway, my point about Yemen was like, again, you have clans that have all these different backgrounds, and a lot of times you can identify people's clans by their surnames because the way how, you know, etc., right? But like, particularly when it comes to, for example, Ansar Allah, right? They are not in the business of, you know, having, because they don't need to, right? Having Sunni Muslims join in their fight against the Sunni majority, you know, army of Yemen that is backed by the United States and Saudi Arabia, etc., right? So that's why the people that sometimes try to conflate, you know, people from Yemen that might just happen to, you know, be, you know, after living through a long period of genocide, and now being under the governance of, you know, the people that fought against said genocide, begin to start to confuse them with something else, right? They begin to act as though they are part of that organization. But regardless, that's a whole separate point. But anyway. Oh wait, let me see here. Wiki says, amongst the native population, there are approximately 1,000 Christians and 6 Jews remaining in 2016. However, Pew Templeton estimates the number of Christians to be as high as 40,000, though most do not publicly identify as such due to fears of religious persecution, and presumably that fear is even stronger amongst Jews. Right. I mean, that's the reason why a lot of Jewish people, right, even like in Latin America, right, to this day, right, I mean, we have a history of having to do that, right? Where, like, you know, and like, because Mexico, you know, secularized after the Mexican Revolution, right, that allowed for people to, you know, if they themselves were more secular in the first place, right, to, you know, wow, this is very surprising. In August 2020, an estimated 100 or so remaining Yemeni Jews, 42 have immigrated to the United Arab Emirates, and the rest would also leave to emigrate to the UAE instead of Israel, Europe, or the US. Right, and again, that's because, like, they speak Arabic, right? I mean, there's everything about them is that they are, you know, Yemeni, right? There's, like, that's one of the major things, right? So, like, that's one of those things where, like the way how Zionism has become, you know, very particular in its way. It's like people almost expect, right, people to choose that. And I'm not saying that, you know, in any negative way. I'm just saying that, like, that, yeah, that is true. Because, like, now, well, like, now they have synagogues, and now they have all of that stuff. And so, you know, so... Okay, everyone, it's been so much fun. I think that I will have to stop here, though. I'm starting to get a little, you know, tired, and I also have to go feed my puppies their dinner. So we are going to go raid the 27 Club. Make sure to tell them hello for me. E.g., when I work in the Emirates airline, one of the flag carriers, I was told you can enter the UAE passport with Israel stamps on it. Oh, interesting. If everyone could please get in the machine so we can head on over to the 27 Club, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much for being with me, for joining me for this stream. Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, for the rest of you and on the YouTube side, again, I'll probably be in chat afterwards. But if you'd like to go somewhere, I definitely would allow one of the mods to, recommend someone to go raid yourselves. So